Hi guys! Tonight we settle into a world of frost, of icy winds curling around wooden walls, and of bellies that rumble as the dark season tightens its grip. You imagine yourself stepping out onto a Viking shoreline, where the sea mist burns cold against your cheeks, and the horizon is little more than a pale band of grey. You wrap your cloak tighter, knowing that once the snow begins to fall, and the daylight shrinks to a handful of hours, survival itself becomes an art. And you, like every Viking farmer, fisherman, and wanderer, need to eat enough to last until the thaw. Without the right stores, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, tell me in the comments where in the world you are, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, and let's slip together into the smoky air of a Viking longhouse, where the story of winter food begins. You trudge across frozen earth, boots crunching on the frost. The fields lie still and barren, the stalks long cut, the soil iron hard. The smell of salt lingers faintly in the wind, mingled with smoke from distant chimneys. Each step reminds you that the land has fallen silent, stripped of its summer generosity. The only way to live through the months ahead is to prepare, and that preparation is measured in stores of grain, fat, and salted fish. The mainstream truth is that Vikings lived in harsh northern climates, where winters were long and brutal. Crops stopped growing, animals struggled, and only the most carefully managed supplies kept families from starvation. It wasn't endless feasting and drinking, as sagas sometimes suggest, but a delicate balance between plenty and hunger. You find yourself listening to the sigh of the sea, picturing boats heavy with dried cod swaying at anchor. And yet, there's always a stranger note to history. Did you know that some Viking folk believed onions could reveal whether a wound was fatal? They would feed broth with onions to the injured. If the smell of onion came from the wound, they assumed the belly had been pierced. Strange, grim, and a reminder of how food and medicine blurred. The hearth glows ahead, promising warmth. You step inside the longhouse, eyes adjusting to the dim, smoky air. People huddle around central fires, wooden beams darkened by years of smoke, furs layered on benches. The smell of stewing meat mingles with sour dairy and the earthy tang of stored roots. Conversations are soft, as though saving breath for warmth. You can almost taste the anticipation of what lies in the clay pots, sealed jars, and bundles hanging from rafters. Historians still argue whether Viking diets were richer in meat or fish during winter. Some claim their coastal settlements relied heavily on dried cod and herring, while inland farmers leaned more on pork and beef slaughtered in late autumn. The truth is probably both, a patchwork quilt of survival strategies stitched by geography. You press your hand against a wooden wall, feeling the chill seeping through. The longhouse is more than a home. It is a warehouse of calories, every nook and cranny packed with the promise of life. Grain pits beneath the floor, barrels of ale tucked against the walls, fish strung like frozen banners overhead. The smell is powerful: smoke, brine, sour milk, fat, and it all whispers the same story. We endure. A child passes you, her hands red from cold, clutching a wooden bowl of skyr, that tangy yogurt-like dairy that carries a sour punch. She licks the last traces from her fingers, unbothered by the chill. That bowl, you realize, might be her breakfast, lunch, and supper, stretched thin but filling. You feel both pity and admiration, seeing how even the youngest learn the rhythm of winter survival. The candles sputter. You sit near the fire, listening to the hiss of fat dripping into flames. You imagine your own hunger, gnawing at the edges of your patience, and then imagine a life where that hunger lingers for months. Every bite, every crumb, carries weight. Perhaps you think of your own kitchen cupboards full, bright, secure, and realize how alien such uncertainty now feels. Yet here, in the Viking world, it was the air you breathed, the heartbeat of every evening meal. Outside, wolves howl. The longhouse walls creak as winds whip against them. Inside, the people sit closer, wrapped in cloaks, bowls in hand, murmuring thanks not only for the food but for one another. It is not merely about survival, it is about endurance together. You feel a calm spread through you as you imagine the firelight flickering on their faces, casting shadows that seem to whisper stories of gods, raids, and lands yet to be discovered. The longhouse quiets, the fire settling into glowing embers. You lean back, heavy with food, heavy with thought, and the hum of Viking winter life surrounds you. The journey into their diet has only begun, and soon you will dig deeper into the tricks and tastes that carried them through the frost. For now, you let your eyelids fall heavier, listening to the soft crackle of wood, the faint breath of cows outside, and the whisper of a sea forever cold. You rise from the warm fire of the longhouse, the smell of smoke still clinging to your cloak, and step out into the biting night. The ground crunches beneath your boots, and you notice the way frost clings like silver dust to every branch. Survival here is never about one day, or even 1 week, it is about months, about stretching the bounty of autumn far into the black heart of winter. And so, your steps take you toward the hidden treasures beneath the soil, the grain pits. Imagine the moment after harvest, when golden barley and rye are gathered. The fields that once shimmered with waving stalks are now stubbled and bare. Farmers dig deep pits, lining them with straw, sealing them with turf and clay, and lowering heavy sacks of grain into the darkness. You crouch by one of these pits, brushing snow away from the earthen lid, and sense how crucial this cache, island. Without it, no bread, no ale, no porridge. Without it, hunger tightens its grip. The mainstream fact here is simple. Grain was the backbone of the Viking diet, especially barley, which grew best in northern climates. Bread, beer, and thick porridges came from these harvests, and the survival of families often hinged on how well they managed storage. Archaeologists have found charred barley grains at ancient sites, tiny blackened witnesses to the importance of this crop. But alongside the familiar, a more curious detail lingers. In some sagas, there are mentions of magical charms whispered over stored grain, blessings intended to protect it from rot or theft. Was it superstition? Or perhaps a ritual that gave comfort in a world where mold or damp could mean starvation? Quirky, yes. But when you kneel at the edge of a frost-bitten field, you can almost imagine farmers muttering words into the cold wind, hoping spirits would keep their grain safe. You lower your ear toward the ground, listening, and in the silence you realize these pits were more than storage, they were insurance. Still, historians debate just how effective such underground caches truly were. Some say that improperly sealed pits often spoiled, while others argue that careful layering of straw and airtight sealing could preserve grain for months. The truth may shift between these extremes, as survival always depended on skill, luck, and the whims of the season. You brush snow off your gloves, imagining the rhythm of daily life. Each morning, a portion of the stored grain is brought up into the longhouse. Some of it goes into thick, dark bread, baked hard on flat stones. Some becomes porridge, simmered with a pinch of salt or, if fortune smiles, a swirl of honey. And some, perhaps the most precious, goes into the beer, bubbling quietly in wooden tubs, turning simple barley into the warmth of ale. The air smells faintly of damp earth, and you picture the constant vigilance of Viking farmers. Rats and mice are an unseen enemy, gnawing through sacks, feasting on what people need most. Cats slink between shadows, more than pets. They are guardians of the food supply. You smile softly at the thought. A Viking cat, whiskers twitching, crouched above a grain pit, every bit as important as the swords hanging on the wall. A child tugs at your sleeve, asking for bread. You kneel, breaking a piece of flatbread from your pack. It is hard as stone, baked to last, and you dip it briefly in water before handing it over. The child gnaws happily, unbothered by the toughness, knowing this is what keeps hunger quiet. You realize again that survival is rarely glamorous. It is hard bread, boiled grain, and the steady repetition of meals that fill but never dazzle. Yet there is something soothing about this constancy. In the quiet of the long winter, each bowl of porridge, each bite of bread, ties you back to the harvest, to summer fields under golden Sunday. Every mouthful is a reminder that time moves in circles, and though the snow presses heavy now, the stalks will rise again. You pause by another pit, hands pressed against the cold earth. Inside, seeds sleep, waiting to be reborn in spring. And you realize that what Vikings stored wasn't only food, but hope. Hope buried in the ground, hope dug out by lantern light, hope chewed in the weary silence of night. Historians still puzzle over how widespread grain pits truly were. Some argue that they were used more in remote or poorer regions, while wealthier farms built above-ground granaries with raised wooden floors. Others think pits were the norm, cheap and practical. You, walking between the darkened mounds, can almost sense both wealth dictating one method, necessity dictating the other. The snow thickens, muffling your steps. You glance back toward the longhouse, its windows glowing faintly orange in the dark. Inside, bowls of hot porridge steam in waiting hands, spoons scraping slowly as the night deepens. Out here, among the pits, you feel the weight of survival pressing close, whispering that these silent stores are the difference between laughter and despair. As you return toward the firelight, your mind drifts to the taste of barley beer, to the crackle of flatbread softened in broth, to the strange little charms spoken over grain pits, and you smile, realizing that in the Viking world, even the simplest sack of barley carried stories worth remembering. The longhouse air lingers on your skin as you wander toward the dairy huts. The night is still bitter, stars like shards of glass above you, but here the smell of milk and smoke welcomes you in. Step closer, and you hear the muffled sounds of cattle shifting in their stalls, their heavy breath steaming in the cold air. It is here, in these simple wooden structures, that another lifeline of Viking survival waits. Most evidence suggests that dairy formed a steady part of the Viking diet. From fresh milk in summer to preserved products in winter, cows, goats, and sheep provided far more than just warmth and hides. Butter, soft cheese, and a tangy yogurt-like creation called skyr were staples, offering both fat and protein in a world where calories meant life. Imagine stirring thick skyr in a clay bowl, the sourness catching on your tongue, filling your stomach with strength. But there's a rather odd custom tied to this world of milk. Some tales describe how whey, the liquid left over from cheese-making, was poured over dried fish or bread to soften it. To modern ears, that might sound unappealing, yet in an age when food could be rock-hard, sour whey was the secret sauce. You imagine dipping a shard of flatbread into the cloudy liquid, the smell sharp, the texture strangely comforting. It's a quirky glimpse into the ingenuity of people who wasted nothing. And yet, researchers remain divided over just how central dairy truly was during the darkest months. Some argue that the cold climate made year-round milking difficult, since animals gave less in winter. Others believe that dried or fermented dairy carried them through when fresh supplies ran out. Archaeological finds of butter buried in bogs hint at long-term storage, though whether that was a regular habit or rare extravagance is still uncertain. Step into the dairy hut itself, and the air is heavy with smoke. Clay pots line the walls, sealed with wax or fat. Some hold butter, its surface hardened, tasting faintly of ash. Others contain lumps of cheese, aging slowly, their scent strong but nourishing. Wooden buckets rest by the hearth, traces of curd clinging to their rims. The sound of dripping whey marks the passage of time, steady as a clock. You picture women and children working here, hands busy with churning, straining, pressing. Their laughter breaks the monotony, though the task is relentless. Every turn of the churn is a battle against hunger yet to come. Butter thickens, cream rises, cheese hardens, and with each process survival feels just a little more secure. Outside, the snow drifts against the door. A cow lows softly, a reminder that living animals too are part of this system. Warm breath, steady milk, the clatter of hooves. These are the background sounds of Viking winter life. You run your hand along a wooden pail, still damp from fresh curd, and wonder how different your own kitchen feels, with fridges humming and milk cartons stacked in rows. It's curious to imagine that these dairy products also carried social meaning. Butter, for example, was not only food, but also a symbol of hospitality. Guests might be offered a dish with butter on top, marking generosity even when supplies were tight. The act of sharing dairy, rich and filling, was as much about honor as nourishment. And so you settle in the smoky hut, taking a slow bite of sour cheese. It crumbles on your tongue, earthy, pungent, sharp with flavor. Around you, children dip bread into bowls of whey, cows shift restlessly, and the fire crackles with warmth. This is not luxury, but it is life, and in the stillness of winter, it carries a sweetness all its own. The wind pushes you onward from the dairy huts, across a stretch of frozen shoreline where gulls circle and cry above the waves. You hear the snap of ropes, the slap of water against wooden hulls, and the faint scent of salt thickens in your throat. This is the coast, where one of the most vital Viking survival strategies takes shape, the drying of fish until it is as stiff and thin as paper. Archaeology confirms that fish was a cornerstone of the Norse diet, especially in coastal settlements. Cod, herring, and salmon filled nets by the thousands, then transformed into stockfish light, durable, and astonishingly long-lasting. Picture wooden racks stretching along the shore, countless split fish hanging open, their white flesh drying in the cold wind. No fire needed, no salt in the simplest cases, the frost itself was the preservative. You walk between these rows, hearing them creak in the breeze like skeletal flags. There's a surprising detail that makes you pause. Some accounts suggest that dried fish was so tough it could double as a weapon. Imagine sailors bickering, one grabbing a stiff slab of cod and striking another across the back. It may sound like a joke, yet the hardness of stockfish was legendary. In later centuries, travelers wrote about needing hammers to break it apart before cooking. You bite into a strip in your imagination, jaw aching, teeth straining, and realize just how valuable a broth-softened meal must have been. Still, experts can't quite agree how much of this fish was kept for home use and how much went to trade. Some argue that stockfish became an export as early as the Viking Age, fueling distant markets in Europe. Others think it remained mostly local, a practical way for families to endure winter without spoilage. The scholarly picture remains blurred, like mist over the fjords, with evidence scattered between sagas, middens, and the testimony of weathered bones. Walk farther along the racks, and you notice the soundscape around you. Dogs bark in the distance, gulls scream overhead, and children dart between poles, their laughter sharp against the icy air. Each family claims a section, each string of fish representing weeks of labor and days of future meals. You watch as a woman checks the drying process, her fingers brushing the stiff flesh, her eyes narrowed with concentration. Too damp, and rot creeps in, too brittle, and the fish crumbles into dust. Balance is everything. At night, the smell of smoke rises from the longhouse chimney, and you step inside again. A pot simmers over the fire, and you see strips of dried fish softening in broth, their rigid edges curling as the steam rises. The smell is salty, savory, comforting. You watch a man crush the fish with the back of his knife, breaking it into flakes that fall into a stew of barley and roots. The family leans forward, bowls ready, spoons poised, eager for the warmth that will fill their stomachs. Close your eyes and imagine the taste. Smoky, salty, chewy at first, then tender, blending with the earthy flavor of turnips, the sweetness of onions, and the sour tang of leftover whey. This is not feast food. It is the flavor of endurance, of repetition. of nights when every meal tastes much like the last but still carries the joy of survival. Curiously, dried fish was also used as a kind of currency in some markets. Traders might accept bundles of stockfish in exchange for cloth, tools, or even livestock. It had value not only for calories but also for its durability. A fish caught in summer could, if well prepared, be eaten in midwinter or even a year later. That longevity made it nearly as precious as silver in the right hands. As you step back outside, the night deepens. Snow falls in soft flakes, drifting onto the racks. You tilt your head upward, watching them land and melt, and you wonder how many winters saw families carefully guarding these rows. The silence is heavy, broken only by the groan of timber and the distant crash of waves. You feel the cold bite at your fingers and imagine what it meant to hang every hope on these fish. The debate continues in your mind. Did Vikings rely more on fish than on meat inland? Some scholars emphasize the sheer scale of fish remains in archaeological digs, suggesting a diet deeply tied to the sea. Others point out that inland farms may have preferred slaughtered animals, with fish serving as a supplement rather than a staple. The truth, as always, is layered: different valleys, different coasts, different winters. And you, walking along this frozen shore, understand that each community had its own rhythm, its own taste of survival. Back in the longhouse, the meal comes together. Bowls are passed, spoons scrape, voices murmur thanks. A child gnaws on a softened strip, eyes half closed, cheeks red from the fire's glow. A dog rests its head on the bench, hoping for scraps. You take your own bowl, lifting it to your lips, letting the salty broth warm your chest. You swallow slowly, aware that in this world, every bite is borrowed time, every meal a promise kept for another day alive. The fire crackles, shadows dance, and the longhouse hums with the quiet rhythm of shared survival. Outside, the fish continue to hang, silent sentinels of hope, creaking in the frozen wind. You drift towards sleep, belly warm, ears full of the hush of winter, the smell of salt still clinging to your cloak. You leave the warmth of the fire once more, your cloak pulled tight, and walk toward the edge of the icy bay. The air here is sharper, laced with the scent of brine and the faint metallic tang of blood. A low shape rests on the shoreline, a seal, hauled onto the rocks, its dark body glistening in the weak winter light. This is no ordinary animal tonight. To Viking families, seals represented not just food, but also light, warmth, and the strange intimacy of survival tied to the sea. It's well documented that seal hunting played a role in the Norse economy, especially for coastal settlements. Seal meat was tough but nourishing, rich in protein, and often boiled into stews that kept bellies full on long nights. More importantly, the fat of the animal could be rendered into oil, poured into small stone lamps that burned steadily when wood was scarce. Imagine yourself crouching beside such a lamp. The flame flickers softly, the smell of animal oil faint but persistent, casting a warm halo across the smoky walls. In that glow, you realize the seal's value stretched far beyond the plate. Among the stranger, practices whispered about in sagas is the idea that some hunters wore seal skins not only for warmth, but as charms. Wrapped in the pelt, they believed they might borrow the animal's spirit, gaining its endurance against the cold seas. It blurs the line between practicality and ritual, between survival gear and magical thinking. You picture a fisherman walking into the surf, his shoulders cloaked in wet, heavy skin, believing he carries with him the strength of the animal itself. And yet, the role of seals in the Viking diet is far from clear. Some researchers argue that seal hunting was widespread, especially in Iceland and Greenland, where other resources were scarce. Others counter that seals were a seasonal or supplementary food, never central to survival, and that whale, fish, and livestock played far larger roles. The archaeological record is uneven. Seal bones turn up in some sites, barely at all in others. The debate lingers like sea fog, unsettled and shifting. Stand for a moment at the edge of the water, The waves crash in rhythm, white spray stinging your face. Men push out small boats, their oars cutting into the dark water, their voices low and steady. Harpoons gleam in their hands, tipped with sharpened bone or iron. You hear the splash, the grunt, the sharp crack as weapon meets flesh. The sea swallows the sound, but you know what it means. Oil for lamps, meat for stews, hides for clothing. Every strike is part of the unbroken rhythm of life against winter's grip. Later, inside the longhouse, the reality becomes clear. A pot hangs over the fire, filled with seal meat simmering in water, salt, and perhaps a few chopped roots. The smell is heavy, strong, almost gamey. You taste it in your imagination, oily, dense, lingering on the tongue longer than you'd like. Yet for those seated around the fire, it means survival. They dip bread into the broth, chew with determination, and let the heat fill their stomachs. No feast, just fuel, but fuel that keeps children from wasting away. At the edge of the hearth, another process takes place. A woman pours rendered fat into a small carved stone bowl. A wick of twisted moss floats within, catching flame when touched by a spark. Instantly, light spills outward, steady and clean. You notice the quiet joy in her face, for in this frozen world, light is as precious as food. Imagine children reading runes or carving wood toys by its glow, their faces soft in the dim amber. The seal has fed more than hunger, it has gifted hours of warmth and sight. Curiously, there are tales that Vikings sometimes offered parts of the seal back to the sea, throwing bones or entrails into the waves as a form of thanks. It echoes traditions found among other northern peoples, where hunters believed balance with the animal world was essential. You picture it, a man standing at the icy shore, his hand releasing scraps into the surf, murmuring words lost to history, a gesture of respect in a world where taking life was never trivial. The smell of seal fat clings to your cloak, stubborn and thick. You step back outside, the snow crunching beneath your boots, and see the oil lamps glowing faintly through the longhouse walls. Each flame flickers like a heartbeat, a promise that darkness has not yet won. Without wood in abundance, without endless supplies of candles, these humble lamps were lifelines. A single animal, hunted with danger, now carries dozens of lives forward through another week of winter. The scholarly picture, as you've sensed, remains unsettled. Some point to large-scale seal drives, entire herds harvested at once along Greenland's coasts, suggesting organized and regular hunting. Others think the effort was sporadic, a matter of opportunity when animals strayed close. The truth may lie between seals, neither central nor negligible, but another stitch in the patchwork quilt of survival. And you, standing at the shore, feel that ambiguity as part of the story itself. In the end, what matters is this: the taste of oily broth in your mouth, the glow of a seal, oil lamp on your cheek, the fur draped over your shoulders against the wind. Every part of the animal was used, nothing wasted, every ounce transformed into endurance. The seal, silent and sleek in the water, became a quiet partner in human survival. You breathe deeply, the air sharp, the sea roaring, and you sense again that strange mixture of gratitude and necessity that defined Viking winters. As you turn back toward the longhouse, the lamps still burning, the voices still murmuring over bowls of stew, you understand how deeply survival was tied to both land and sea. Grain from the fields, dairy from the huts, fish from the racks, and now seal from the waves, all woven together into one fragile but enduring thread. You push the door open, step inside, and sit once more by the fire. The lamp flickers beside you, its light trembling on the walls. You close your eyes, letting the smell of oil and the taste of salt drift through your imagination. It is not a comfortable feast, but it is enough. And in this frozen season, enough is everything. The fire hums low in the longhouse as you shift on the bench, the warmth of the seal oil lamp still glowing faintly beside you. Your stomach feels heavier now, full of salty broth, and yet your lips crave something else. something to wash it down. You notice a wooden tub pushed close to the hearth, a sweet, yeasty scent drifting upward. The Vikings, it seems, never let winter pass without their barley beer, their liquid bread. Archaeological finds consistently reveal brewing vessels in Norse settlements, from carved wooden tubs to clay amphorae. Most evidence suggests that beer was not merely for celebration, it was daily sustenance. Weak in alcohol but rich in calories, it filled bellies when food was thin and water could be risky. Picture yourself dipping a ladle into the frothy brew, the liquid cloudy, golden and sour sweet on your tongue. Even when snow piled high against the longhouse walls, this bubbling drink tied you back to summer fields of barley. Curiously, one unusual practice noted in later folklore was the habit of blessing beer with carved runes. Some brewers etched protective signs onto their vessels, believing the symbols would ward off sourness or theft. Imagine leaning over a wooden vat, your finger tracing lines of power into the froth, whispering words to Odin or Thor as yeast fizzed quietly below. Was it superstition, or simply the comfort of ritual in a world where one spoiled tub could spell hunger? Experts can't seem to agree how strong Viking ale really was. Some argue it resembled modern light beer, barely intoxicating but safe to drink. Others suggest stronger varieties existed for feasts and rituals, especially when honey was added to create mead. The truth likely depended on resources. Plentiful honey or grain led to more potent brews, while lean years produced weak, watery ale. Even now, scholars debate whether the everyday drink was closer to porridge than beer, thick and chewy with floating grains. Close your eyes and listen. Around you, men and women laugh, their voices softened by the drink. Children sip weaker bowls, lips sticky with foam. The fire crackles, mugs clink, and the heaviness of winter loosens for a moment. You sip again, the warmth spreading through your chest, not burning like spirits but settling like bread in your belly. Each swallow tastes of earth and grain, of the labor of sowing, harvesting, and storing. The smell is yeasty, faintly sweet, and smoky from the fire. You lean closer to the vat, watching the bubbles rise lazily, and picture the process. Barley soaked, malted, dried, mashed with hot water, then fermented with wild yeasts drifting in from the air. It's crude by modern standards, but in this world, it works. The drink carries vitamins, calories, and a small measure of cheer. There's a peculiar tidbit that makes you smile. In some accounts, beer was thick enough that a spoon could stand upright in the cup. Imagine eating your drink, chewing soft grains as you sip, the line between meal and beverage blurred. It sounds strange, yet for a Viking farmer, it was simply efficient. Why waste energy separating food from drink when both could arrive in one steaming bowl? And then, the broader question lingers. Was beer the drink of every Viking, or only for those with grain to spare? Some historians argue that poorer families leaned more on water, milk, or whey, saving beer for special days. Others believe beer was so central that even the humblest household brewed some, no matter how weak. The scholarly picture is cloudy, much like the ale itself. You take another sip, feeling your eyelids grow heavy. The ale dulls the sharp edge of hunger, softens the rasp of smoke in your throat, and makes the longhouse laughter sound warmer. A bard begins a story at the far end of the hall, his words rising and falling like waves, the rhythm carried by the steady drinking of his listeners. You lean back, mug in hand, and wonder if perhaps beer itself was the true bard of the winter, weaving threads of survival, ritual, and companionship. The fire pops, sparks leaping upward. A woman beside you offers a slice of flatbread, dipping it in the ale before biting down. The gesture makes you chuckle, soaking hard bread in beer to soften it, a small luxury in a world of endless chewing. She smiles, shoulders hunched in her fur cloak, and you feel the brief warmth of community wash over you. As the night deepens, mugs empty, laughter fades, and the fire burns low. The ale vat still bubbles faintly, like a heart beating in the dark. You set down your cup, stretch your legs toward the embers, and breathe in the yeasty air one last time. It is not a feast, not a luxury, but a reminder. Sometimes survival tastes of barley, sour and sweet, heavy and comforting, carrying you one sip closer to spring. The longhouse has grown quiet. Embers glow faintly, children snore beneath woolen blankets, and the air carries the sour sweetness of ale still bubbling in the vat. You step outside once more, your breath clouding in the frozen night. The fields stretch before you, pale and barren, their rows long harvested. And yet, tucked beneath the frost, humble vegetables sleep. Tonight, you bend low and imagine pulling from the icy soil the hardy roots that once kept Vikings alive, turnips and cabbages. It's well attested that hardy vegetables like turnips, kale, and cabbages formed part of the Viking winter diet. Archaeological digs in Scandinavia reveal pollen and plant remains confirming their presence, suggesting they were among the few crops able to withstand cold northern soils. You picture yourself kneeling at a frost-crusted row, tugging a stubborn root free. It smells earthy, sharp, with a bitterness that lingers on your tongue when you slice it raw. There's a rather odd little note in medieval writings. Some households supposedly stored turnips in cellars by packing them in sand or straw, sometimes burying them in ash. The result? A root that looked dusty but stayed edible for months. Imagine rummaging through a wooden bin, brushing away grit to reveal a pale, wrinkled turnip that still offered sustenance in the dead of February. Not glamorous, but life-saving. And yet, specialists remain divided about just how much these vegetables mattered compared to meat, fish, and grain. Some argue they were staples, particularly for poorer families who couldn't afford large herds. Others downplay their role, pointing out that sagas rarely praise cabbage soup, focusing instead on mead and feasting. The evidence is patchy botanical traces whisper of turnip beds, but written lore sings of roast oxen. Perhaps the truth lies in between, with humble roots feeding the masses while meat fed the stories. Step into the smoky longhouse once again, and you see the vegetables at work. A pot hangs over the fire, filled with diced turnips simmering with barley, maybe a shred of salted fish. The steam fogs the air, smelling earthy, faintly sweet and comforting. A woman stirs slowly, humming under her breath. She tastes the broth, nods, and adds a pinch of salt with practiced hands. Around her, hungry eyes watch. The texture is soft, yielding. You imagine a spoonful. The turnip sweetens slightly as it cooks, mellowing its bitterness, thickening the broth. A few wilted cabbage leaves float near the surface, their edges dark but edible. It's not a meal to boast about, but it warms bellies and staves off illness. Modern science tells us vitamin C hides in these plants, though Vikings would not have known the term. They simply knew that those who ate more roots tended to outlast the winter chill. Curiously enough, some folklore ties cabbages to protection. In a few northern traditions, placing a cabbage stalk above the door was thought to ward off misfortune. Perhaps the vegetable's stubborn endurance inspired belief in its protective spirit. You picture a Viking farmer tacking a dried cabbage stalk above the longhouse threshold, the leaves brittle, the gesture half practical, half magical. The debate lingers in your mind. Did these humble plants truly hold off scurvy? Or was that more the work of dairy and fish? Some scholars point to skeletal remains lacking signs of vitamin deficiency, suggesting the diet worked well enough. Others argue the archaeological record is too thin, and that small outbreaks of deficiency might simply be invisible now. It is another question without a neat answer, hidden like the roots themselves beneath the soil. Children gather near the fire, each clutching a wooden bowl. They slurp noisily, cabbage broth running down their chins. One boy wrinkles his nose, muttering that he'd prefer dried fish. His mother chuckles, tapping his head, and tells him to eat what the gods have given. The hall fills with the sound of spoons scraping wood, of satisfied sighs, of survival unfolding one mouthful at a time. You lean back, bowl warm in your hands, and breathe in the mingled smells: smoke, cabbage, turnip, barley. They may not sound enticing, but together they carry the rhythm of life through endless snow. You glance around the longhouse, seeing tired faces soften as the food takes hold, and you feel a quiet admiration for these uncelebrated heroes of the Viking table. Outside, the frost thickens. Stars glimmer overhead, cold and watchful. You step into the night, your breath misting, and think of the rows of vegetables planted months ago under summer Sunday. Their roots now sit in cellars, in pits, in ash, waiting for hands to grasp them, waiting to boil into soups that whisper comfort against hunger. These simple plants tell you something profound. Survival isn't about glory. It isn't feasts, raids, or gold. It's the humble crunch of a turnip, the steam of cabbage broth, the gritty taste of food that is never wasted. That truth lingers on your tongue as you walk back toward the longhouse, the warmth of roots and fire guiding you through the frozen dark. You awaken to the sound of lowing cattle outside the longhouse, their voices echoing against the snowy hills. The air inside smells different this morning, rich, metallic, and unmistakably heavy. Today is no ordinary day. It is the season of slaughter. Once the fields are bare and the weather turns cruel, families face the sobering truth. Not all livestock can survive the long, foodless months. And so, in a single sweep of necessity, animals are butchered, and the meat becomes the backbone of winter survival. Excavations across Scandinavia consistently reveal bones from pigs, cattle, goats, and sheep, pointing to the central role of animal protein in the Viking diet. Pork was especially favoured, often salted or smoked to last the season. Beef and mutton, though tougher, carried their own weight, and goats provided both meat and milk before the inevitable culling. You imagine stepping into a farmyard in November, the air sharp with frost, the ground stained with fresh blood, smoke rising from hastily lit fires. It is a day of both abundance and grief. There's a curious detail mentioned in some sagas. Communal feasting often followed the slaughter. Families would gather, roasting fresh meat while singing and drinking, as if to transform the brutality into celebration. Picture the warmth of a longhouse packed with neighbours, laughter echoing over platters of sizzling pork, the sting of smoke in your eyes, and the bittersweet knowledge that feasting today meant leaner meals tomorrow. A strange kind of joy, born out of necessity. And still, scholars can't quite pin down the exact balance between fresh and preserved meat. Some argue that the majority of animals were consumed quickly, before spoilage could set in, with only a portion smoked or salted for later. Others believe more extensive preservation methods kept households supplied well into spring. The evidence is tantalizing but uneven: charred bones in middens, traces of salt in storage pits, sagas boasting of grand feasts. The truth shifts like smoke in the rafters. Step closer to the hearth and see how this meat transforms. Hams hang from beams, smoke curling around them until their skins harden to dark crusts. Sausages are stuffed with spiced meat and fat, twisted into loops and laid above the fire. Pots bubble with stews made from offal, thickened with barley, flavoured with onions and herbs. The smell is overwhelming, savoury, fatty, a promise of strength in the cold months ahead. The first bites are almost shocking in richness. After weeks of fish and roots, fresh pork melts on your tongue, salty and tender. The broth coats your throat, heavy with marrow. A child slurps noisily beside you, her cheeks smeared with grease. The room hums with contentment, bellies full for once, laughter shaking the smoky air. It feels like a festival, but beneath the joy lies the sobering knowledge. This abundance must be stretched carefully. Waste nothing, use everything. Among the stranger tidbits of Viking survival, there are tales of blood pudding made from the very liquid spilling on slaughter day. Mixed with barley and herbs, boiled until thick, it became another dish that turned necessity into sustenance. You watch a woman stir a pot of the dark mixture, her face calm, her hands steady, as children peer curiously at the bubbling contents. It might make you squirm, yet here, nothing could be spared. The question still unsettles researchers. How did families ensure meat didn't rot before the snow melted? Some argue that freezing alone kept supplies safe in harsher regions, with meat hung outdoors like frozen boards until needed. Others believe smoking was more common, filling longhouses with haze but creating durability. Salt, when available through trade, added another layer of preservation. The truth likely blended all three, depending on wealth, geography, and sheer luck. Walk outside and the farmyard tells the story. Strips of meat hang from wooden racks, stiffening in the cold wind. Dogs circle the edges, whining for scraps, eyes glowing in the snowlight. Ravens wheel overhead, their cries harsh and insistent, waiting for bones tossed aside. The ground crunches beneath your boots, slick with ice and stained faintly red. It is not a scene of horror, it is survival written in flesh and smoke. Inside again, you notice how every part of the animal is cherished. Hides become cloaks and blankets. Bones are cracked open for marrow or boiled into stock. Fat is rendered into tallow for candles and cooking. Even hooves and sinews find use, crafted into glue or tools. The animal is gone, yet in 100 ways it remains. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. Curiously enough, sagas often weave meat into ritual. Offerings to the gods frequently involved cuts of pork or beef, sometimes burned, sometimes shared among the faithful. To eat such meat was not just nourishment but a sacred act, binding people to deities and to one another. You picture a bowl lifted toward the smoky rafters, voices chanting thanks, while the taste of roast pork lingers on every tongue. The longhouse quiets after the feast. Bellies are full, smoke curls lazily in the air, and you lean back, drowsy. Outside, the snow falls steady, covering the stains of the day. The animals are gone, their voices silenced, yet in their place rises the promise of survival. The smell of smoked pork still clings to your cloak, sharp and satisfying, as you close your eyes. You realize something simple, almost humbling. Survival is not glamorous. It is slaughter day, smoke, grease, bones, and the mingled emotions of gratitude and sorrow. It is the taste of meat eaten quickly, then stretched thin for weeks on end. It is a reminder that abundance always comes with cost, and that even in joy, there lingers the shadow of hunger waiting just beyond the door. The air inside the longhouse hangs heavy with the smell of meat and smoke. Yet as the days slip deeper into winter, you notice the stew pots changing. The slabs of pork and beef are gone, consumed in the early feasts. What remains now are bones, pale and knobby, stacked in baskets near the hearth. The people look at them not as scraps, but as treasure, for from these bones comes one of the cleverest survival tricks of all, drawing out nourishment again and again, until nothing remains but dust. Excavations at Viking sites often reveal bones split open, marrow scraped away, and fragments showing repeated boiling. It's strong evidence that marrow and bone broth were more than occasional meals, they were strategies for survival. You picture yourself leaning over a steaming pot where cattle bones clatter against iron, bubbles rising as the water turns cloudy with fat and flavor. The smell is rich, earthy, a faint iron tang. Among the more curious notes from sagas and later folklore is the habit of boiling bones multiple times, sometimes 3 or even 4 rounds, until every trace of fat or gelatin had seeped into the broth. Imagine lifting the same shin bone from the pot on the 3rd day, gnawed smooth, yet still capable of giving up one last whisper of sustenance. Children might suck at the hollow ends, pulling the final sweetness of marrow from within, the act both playful and desperate. Scholars remain divided on how widespread this practice was. Some argue that constant reboiling reflects only periods of famine, when resources were dangerously thin. Others counter that even in prosperous households, thrift demanded it. Why waste nourishment when every calorie carried weight? The truth may be both. A cultural habit of efficiency, sometimes born of crisis, sometimes simply the Viking way of life. The broth itself is surprisingly satisfying. You lift a ladle to your lips and taste the warmth, faintly meaty, slick with fat, soothing to your throat. Into the pot, cooks often added grains of barley, chopped turnips, or even dried herbs. The result thickened into a stew, not luxurious but filling, the kind of meal that silences a rumbling stomach and steadies weary hands. In a world without supplements or vitamins, such broths also offered minerals and strength unseen but deeply felt. There's an unusual detail you notice as you watch. Bones were sometimes used twice over, not only as food but also as fuel. Once boiled dry, they could be tossed into the fire, burning hot enough to heat the room. You imagine the snap and pop of marrow-dried bones feeding the flames, their last gift of energy released into light and warmth. It's a strange poetry, from bone to broth to ash, nothing left unused. Inside the longhouse, children cluster eagerly with bowls, dipping hunks of bread into the broth until the crusts soften. Their eyes close with pleasure at the warmth filling their mouths. An old man gnaws the edge of a bone, sucking slowly, his beard flecked with grease. The hall hums with the sound of spoons scraping wood, of fire hissing as fat drips into the flames. It is not feast day joy, but quiet relief, the comfort of knowing another meal has been eked from the pot. Researchers still discuss whether such practices reveal poverty or wisdom. Some argue that only the desperate would boil bones thrice, stretching food until it was little more than flavored water. Others suggest it was common sense, an early form of sustainability, ensuring nothing went to waste in a world where waste could kill. You feel the debate as you sip, and you realize the distinction hardly matters. Hunger doesn't care what scholars decide centuries later. Outside, the night howls. Snow lashes against the wooden walls, and you step briefly into the storm. The cold bites sharply, yet you carry with you the warmth of broth lingering in your chest. You look toward the piles of snowdrifts burying the land, and you understand why bones mattered. Nothing grows now. Nothing moves in the frozen silence. Only what was stored, salted, or simmered stands between families and starvation. Inside again, the air fogs with steam. Women lift bones from the pot, lay them aside, and crack them open with small axes. The marrow glistens pale yellow, soft and buttery. You take a taste in your mind, savoring the richness that melts across your tongue. It is stronger than the broth, almost decadent by comparison. A last burst of luxury wrung from scraps. Children crowd close, each hoping for a turn, each giggling when their lips shine with marrow. Curiously, in some later Scandinavian traditions, bone marrow was linked to healing. People believed it strengthened the weak and restored those recovering from illness. You picture a Viking mother spooning marrow into the mouth of a sick child, whispering encouragement as if the essence of the animal itself could bring back vitality. Perhaps it did protein and fat as medicine before the word even existed. The scholarly debate lingers too over whether these practices shaped culture. Some claim they reinforced communal bonds, with families or even villages gathering to share what little remained. Others think it was more private, each household fending for itself. The evidence doesn't settle neatly, leaving you with the image of both possibilities: quiet family meals or larger circles of survival, each bowl a statement of resilience. The longhouse grows still as the night deepens. The last pot simmers low, the bones pale and hollow now, their gifts given. The fire glows brighter as they're tossed into the flames, crackling with one final offering of heat. You lean back, your belly warm, your heart steady. It is not abundance, not luxury, but survival distilled into its simplest form. Broth from bones, marrow from hollows, heat from ash. As you close your eyes, the echoes remain. The creak of bones in boiling water, the laughter of children licking marrow, the sigh of relief when even scraps become sustenance. And you understand that in the Viking winter, survival was not about what you had, but about how cleverly you used it. The embers fade low, and still the scent of broth clings to the rafters. You rise, pulling your cloak close, and step into the biting dawn. The snow crunches beneath your boots, and in the distance, the faint hum of bees seems almost laughably out of place in this frozen world. Yet the memory of summer lives on in small clay pots tucked safely into corners of the longhouse. Inside them, sealed with wax or fat, lies one of the sweetest treasures the Vikings possessed: honey. It's well documented that honey was both food and medicine across the Norse world. While not produced in vast quantities, what little was gathered from hives or acquired through trade held immense value. You picture lifting the lid of a clay jar, the golden substance glistening even in dim firelight. Thick, sweet, and shimmering, it was a concentrated burst of sunlight in the middle of winter darkness. A spoonful on the tongue could feel like warmth itself. Among the stranger details preserved in Icelandic law codes is the careful protection of beekeeping. Bees were precious, and their hives guarded jealously, sometimes even considered property equal to livestock. Imagine a farmer in summer, wrapped against stings, carefully cutting combs while children watched wide-eyed, already dreaming of the taste that would carry them through the cold. It makes you smile, seeing how something so small could carry such weight. Researchers continue to debate just how common honey truly was in Viking households. Some argue it was rare, reserved for chieftains, rituals, or festive occasions. Others suggest that wild hives or modest beekeeping allowed more families access than once believed. The archaeological record offers only fragments, residues of beeswax in jars, traces of honey in burial goods, references in sagas. Was it everyday sweetness or a rare delight? The answer shifts, elusive as the bees themselves. Step closer to the hearth now, and you see honey at work. A woman stirs a pot of porridge, barley grains swelling in hot water. Into it, she drizzles a thin thread of honey, golden against the pale gruel. The smell rises sweet and nutty, and children lean forward, eager for a taste. You take a spoonful in your imagination. Warm, comforting, a touch of luxury hidden in the mundane. Even a thin ribbon of honey transforms the dish into something festive. Another jar rests nearby, but this one isn't for the kitchen. Honey doubled as medicine, spread over wounds or mixed with herbs to soothe sore throats. You picture a healer bending over a boy with a cut on his arm, gently smearing honey into the wound. Its natural antibacterial properties, though unknown in scientific terms, worked well enough to win trust. In sagas, honey is sometimes mentioned in healing rituals, blurring the line between remedy and blessing. Curiously enough, mead, the honey wine of legend, sits at the center of many Viking myths. The mead of poetry, a mythical drink granting wisdom, is said to have been brewed from honey. In reality, mead was brewed when honey was abundant, producing a strong, intoxicating drink prized at feasts. Imagine lifting a horn filled with golden liquid, sweet and fiery on your tongue, laughter rising around the hall as stories lengthen and courage grows. But historians remain uncertain whether mead flowed as freely as the sagas suggest. Some argue it was rare, brewed only for great gatherings, while beer and ale filled daily mugs. Others believe small batches were more common, each household brewing when they could spare the honey. The truth may again lie between, with mead existing more as a memory of summer, a reminder of sweetness in an otherwise salty, smoky diet. You walk outside and picture the bees themselves. In summer, fields of clover and wildflowers buzzed with their labor. Farmers sometimes kept skeps, woven baskets used as hives, or sought out wild colonies in trees. The harvest was dangerous, stings inevitable, but the reward glittered golden. You see a child's hand dipping into comb, pulling out sticky wax and licking honey greedily, eyes shining. That memory would carry into winter, when the jars were opened sparingly, each spoonful measured like treasure. Inside, the longhouse glows with warmth. Tonight, honey appears again, this time in a medicinal brew. A man coughs in the corner, his chest rattling. His wife mixes honey with warm water and herbs, pressing the cup to his lips. He drinks slowly, eyes closing, a sigh of relief escaping him. Whether it healed or merely soothed, the sweetness carried comfort, and comfort was itself a kind of cure. There's an odd little belief tucked into folklore. Bees were thought to carry messages to the gods. Some families whispered news to their hives, treating the insects as part of the household. Imagine a Viking woman leaning close to a hive, telling the bees her husband had died, ensuring the creatures shared in the family's grief. It is a tender, uncanny image, a reminder of how deeply intertwined honey was with life and death alike. As you sit by the fire, a jar is opened, and a small spoonful offered to you. The sweetness coats your tongue, thick and rich, unlike anything else in this harsh winter. It lingers long after it is swallowed, a reminder that not every taste of Viking survival was bitter. Sometimes, even in the darkest months, there was a glimpse of sunlight preserved in clay. The debate will continue among historians. Was honey a rare delicacy, or a modest staple hidden in quiet jars? You cannot settle it tonight. What you can feel is the glow in your chest, the comfort on your tongue, and the quiet joy spreading through the hall as children lick honey from wooden spoons. For a moment, hunger loosens its grip, the darkness feels less sharp, and winter itself seems a little more forgiving. You lean back against the wooden beam, the jar passing slowly from hand to hand. Outside, the snow falls silently, thick and endless. Inside, the taste of honey lingers, a promise that summer, though far away, still hums faintly in memory. You close your eyes, warmed by sweetness, and drift deeper into the Viking night. The sweetness of honey fades from your tongue, and in its place you taste salt carried on the wind. Step outside again, and the air stings your cheeks with a briny bite. The fjord lies before you, grey and restless, dotted with ships whose sails snap in the cold gusts. Tonight your attention shifts from what the Vikings stored to what they sought: salt, the quiet mineral that made survival possible. Without it, no fish could be kept, no meat preserved, no broth flavored. Salt was the silent thread stitching winter together. Archaeological finds along trade routes show that blocks of salt were among the goods carried into Scandinavia. It's clear that local production was limited. The harsh northern climates offered few natural salt pans. Instead, Vikings sailed outward, trading furs, walrus ivory, and even slaves for the precious white crystals. You picture a ship pulling into a foreign harbor, barrels creaking under the weight of salt, the crew weary but triumphant. Those barrels were not luxury, they were life. Curiously, some sagas hint that salt wasn't only practical, but symbolic. In one tale, a magical salt mill produces endless wealth, an echo of how vital salt felt in daily life. Imagine the awe of pouring crystals into a pot, watching them dissolve, knowing this pinch might preserve a slab of pork for months. Salt was so valuable that it even inspired legends of endless abundance. Yet historians disagree on just how heavily Viking households depended on it. Some argue that dried and smoked methods sufficed, with salt as a rare addition. Others counter that salt was indispensable, especially for exporting fish like herring and cod, which required salting before shipment. The truth may differ by region. Inland farms might have smoked more meat, while coastal traders leaned on salt to reach distant markets. You step closer to the shore where men heave barrels from ships. Their shoulders strain, their boots slip on icy planks, but their faces brighten at the sight of the cargo. Salt is as precious as silver here, its crystals shining like frost in the firelight. Women gather with baskets, eager to see their share, knowing each handful is a promise of meals yet to come. Inside the longhouse, salt's magic becomes obvious. A pot of fish simmers, and a woman sprinkles a pinch from a small pouch. Instantly, the flavor deepens, the aroma stronger, richer. You taste it in your imagination. Broth that would have been flat now sings with sharpness, each mouthful more satisfying. Another slab of pork is rubbed with salt, then hung high in the smoky rafters. Days later, the flesh will firm, the color darken, and the meat will wait patiently for winter's call. There's a curious tidbit tucked into later traditions. Salt was sometimes scattered on thresholds to ward off evil spirits. Was it superstition, or simply another reflection of salt's immense value? You picture a Viking mother shaking a pinch across the doorway, her children watching solemnly. To her, the crystals weren't just food, they were protection, a glimmer of safety in a world ruled by cold and chance. The debates continue among researchers. Was salt accessible to every household, or only the wealthier farms and trading families? Some skeletal remains hint at higher sodium diets near coasts, suggesting more frequent use. Inland graves, by contrast, reveal fewer signs, hinting that salt may have been a luxury. The evidence remains patchy, leaving us to imagine two Viking winters, one where every pot carries a pinch of salt, and one where families chew unsalted roots in silence. As the night deepens, you follow a group of traders back into the hall. Their hands still smell faintly of brine, their cloaks dusted with frost. They sit heavily by the fire, mugs of ale pressed into their hands, and speak in low tones of distant markets of Frankish salt, Baltic salt, English salt. Their words blur, yet you sense the pride beneath them. They have not just brought wealth, they have brought survival. The children, curious, slip fingers into the salt pouch when no one watches. They lick the crystals, their eyes widening at the sharp sting on their tongues. They laugh, giggling at the strange taste, their lips puckering. For them, it is candy of a sort, a treasure rarer than sweets. You smile at the innocence, at the way survival and joy sometimes overlap. Outside again, the snow falls steadily, covering the barrels stacked by the shore. The fjord groans with ice, the ships rocking gently against their moorings. You touch the rough wood of a salt barrel, your hand cold against the damp surface, and you feel the weight of history pressing close. Without these barrels, much of the Viking world would have withered. Without them, meat rots, fish spoils, hunger grows. There's an old phrase that comes to mind, whispered by some: salt is life. In the Viking winter, it was no exaggeration. Salt kept food edible, kept bellies full, kept trade flowing, kept hope alive. You walk back toward the longhouse, the taste of brine still sharp on your lips, and you realize how strange it is to overlook such a simple mineral when it was once as vital as fire itself. The hall glows with firelight as you return, your boots shaking off snow at the door. Bowls of salted stew wait, steam rising in gentle clouds. You take your seat, spoon in hand, and taste the broth. It is savory, comforting, enduring. Outside, winter howls. Inside, salt holds everything together. The stew warms you from within, its salty tang still clinging to your tongue. But soon you notice another sound, the sharp crack of bread breaking. At the far end of the hall, a man pounds a flat round against the table, and it resounds like a drum. You lean closer, curious, and discover the Viking answer to long-term food storage beyond grain and meat. Bread baked so dense and hard it could survive months, even years, without spoiling. Excavations at Norse farmsteads often uncover fragments of charred bread, thick and coarse, sometimes no bigger than a coin, sometimes the size of your hand. These traces tell us that bread was no soft, fluffy loaf as you might imagine today. Instead, it was heavy, chewy, often closer to stone than sponge. Archaeologists believe such bread was baked dry and stored carefully, meant to be soaked before eating. You imagine trying to bite it fresh and cracking a tooth, the crunch echoing painfully in your jaw. Curiously, later accounts from Northern Europe mention bread baked hard as bricks specifically for sea voyages. Sailors carried it in barrels, knowing it would last months on the open water. Some nicknamed it ship's bread, and though those accounts are later than the Viking Age, it's easy to picture Norse crews gnawing on something just as unforgiving. Imagine dipping a slab into broth, waiting for it to soften before daring to chew. Practical, yes. Pleasant, not always. Scholars remain divided on how central this kind of bread was to everyday winter survival. Some argue it was common, prepared in large batches after harvest and stored for lean months. Others suggest it was more of a travel food, used by traders and raiders, while households at home leaned more on fresh porridge and flatbreads cooked daily. The truth may blur between the two, with hard bread serving both as household reserve and portable ration. You picture the process: women kneeling by the hearth, kneading coarse barley flour with water, maybe a little salt if luck allowed. No yeast to soften it, no time to rise. The dough is flattened, placed on hot stones or iron griddles, and baked until it hardens into near permanence. The smell is faint, toasty, a little nutty, but the texture is unyielding. These rounds are stacked in baskets, wrapped in cloth, and stored away for the long months ahead. Step into the circle of firelight where families eat. A boy holds a piece of bread in one hand and a bowl of broth in the other. He dunks the bread again and again, finally biting when it turns soft enough. The crust flakes into the soup, thickening it, turning thin broth into something closer to a meal. You try a bite in your mind. Bland, heavy, a bit gritty from the barley husks. Yet it fills your stomach, pressing away the ache of hunger. Among the stranger tidbits preserved in sagas is the mention of bread as a weapon not just metaphorically, but literally. Some jokes describe throwing dense loaves at enemies or fools, knowing the weight could bruise. It may have been hyperbole, but one look at these rock-hard discs and you believe it. Bread wasn't just food, it was endurance hardened into shape. Researchers still puzzle over the balance of grains in these loaves. Barley was most common, but rye and oats also appear in archaeological remains. Wheat, prized and rare, was likely reserved for the wealthy or for special occasions. Some bread even carried crushed seeds or herbs, lending flavor and variety when possible. The evidence suggests a spectrum. The poor gnawed on barley bricks, while the rich savored softer wheat loaves baked in larger hearths. As the night stretches on, the hall fills with the sounds of chewing, of bread cracking in hands, of broth slurping. It is not a glamorous feast, but it is steady, reliable. You notice the comfort on people's faces, the relief of a stomach settling after a long day's hunger. Bread and broth mundane, repetitive, but in this world, nothing mattered more. Step outside once more, the snow glowing faintly under the moon. Imagine a trader's ship rocking on the waves, barrels of hard bread stacked in the hold, sailors gnawing as gulls cry overhead. The bread so tough it requires soaking in ale, softening in fish stew, or even grinding back into porridge. A single food, versatile, enduring, carried from hearth to harbour. Inside, you linger near the fire, holding a piece in your hand. It is rough beneath your fingers, edges sharp, crumb almost non-existent. You dip it into a cup of beer, watch it absorb the liquid, then take a bite. It softens just enough, the sourness of ale cutting through the bland grain. You chew slowly, tasting history itself, the determination to make food that lasted, no matter how unkind to the teeth. The debate will never end. Was this bread an everyday staple, or a last resort in lean years? The fragments unearthed give only whispers. Yet sitting here, in the smoky glow of a Viking longhouse, you understand that survival rarely depended on luxury. It depended on stubbornness, on food that endured as long as the winter demanded. The laughter fades as people finish their bowls. Children doze against their parents, crumbs clinging to their lips. Dogs lick the scraps, tails wagging lazily. The fire hisses low, sending shadows flickering across beams heavy with hanging meat and herbs. You close your eyes, the hard bread still heavy in your stomach, and realize that sometimes survival is less about flavor and more about sheer resilience baked into every bite. The hall grows quiet again, the clatter of bowls fading into the night. You step outside, your boots sinking into deep snow, the cold striking sharp against your face. The land looks barren, silent, and utterly unforgiving. Yet you know that beneath this crust of frost, and even along the edges of frozen forests, the Vikings still managed to find food. Foraging did not end. When the snows came, it only changed its rhythm. You crouch low, pulling aside a drift of snow, and discover the small, stubborn gifts the land still offers. Lichens, berries trapped under ice, frozen herbs, even stinging nettles preserved by the cold. Excavations at Norse sites reveal traces of wild plants, seeds, nuts, and berry pits, suggesting that even in the depths of winter, people turn to the forest floor. Scholars point to lingonberries and crowberries, tough little fruits that clung to bushes long after frost. When frozen, they could last deep into the cold months, like tiny jewels hidden under white blankets. Imagine brushing away snow to uncover a handful of shriveled red berries, popping them into your mouth and tasting their tart bite against the dull monotony of roots and fish. There's a peculiar detail tucked into later Scandinavian traditions. Lichens, especially Iceland moss, were sometimes boiled into thin gruels, bitter, fibrous, hardly appetizing, yet capable of filling a stomach. In desperate times, Vikings likely turned to these same plants. You picture a pot steaming with greenish broth, the smell earthy, sharp, almost medicinal. Children sip it reluctantly, wrinkling their noses, but still the warmth spreads through their bellies. It is food, after all, and food means another day endured. Researchers remain uncertain about the full extent of winter foraging. Some argue that such meals were rare, reserved for true famine when stored supplies ran low. Others suggest that gathering under snow was routine, a safety net woven into daily survival. The truth may vary by region, coastal families leaning more on fish, inland farmers relying more on wild roots and herbs. The archaeological record whispers hints but leaves the full picture clouded. You walk along the edge of the forest, the snow muffling your steps. A woman kneels ahead, her cloak dusted white, hands digging in the frozen soil. She pulls free a cluster of wild carrots, their shapes twisted and small, but edible. She brushes dirt away, breath clouding in the air, and tucks them into her basket. Beside her, children hunt for frozen nettles, careful not to touch the sharp hairs still clinging to the stems. The nettles sting less when wilted by frost, and soon they will be thrown into soup for extra flavor. The sounds of this small harvest echo softly, roots breaking from soil, baskets creaking, breath puffing in rhythm. You crouch beside them, the cold biting at your knees, and imagine the taste of these finds. A handful of berries crushed into porridge, their tartness sharp on your tongue. Nettles boiled into broth, earthy and green, a faint metallic note lingering in your mouth. Lichens simmered until soft, the bitterness dulled but never erased. Strange, perhaps, but each bite carries the promise of survival. Among the quirks of Viking life, some sagas mention gathering seaweed along the coasts. Though evidence is scarce, it's likely that edible kelp found its way into meals, especially during winters when fishing failed. Imagine standing on a frozen shore, waves crashing, your hands pulling slimy fronds from rocks. Dried by the fire, they become chewy, salty strips, a poor substitute for meat but still full of minerals. You taste it in your mind, briny and odd, yet somehow refreshing against the heaviness of bread and broth. The scholarly picture is still unsettled. Were such foods staples or merely famine foods? Some archaeologists argue that frequent remains of berries in middens show they were regular fare, not just emergency rations. Others caution that evidence of lichens and seaweed suggests desperation. You walk through the snow, thinking of both arguments, and realize that in truth survival leaves no single pattern. Each household, each valley, made do with what it could. Inside the longhouse again, a pot steams with this foraged mix. A handful of berries, roots, nettles, maybe even lichens float in the broth. The smell is strange, sharp and sour, yet not unpleasant. A woman stirs slowly, humming as she works, her children waiting eagerly though their faces betray mixed feelings. You sit near the fire, bowl in hand, and sip the hot liquid. It tastes of earth, of bitterness softened by warmth, of desperation turned into determination. The fire crackles, children slurp noisily, and dogs lick at dropped scraps. The hall fills with warmth not just from the food, but from the simple act of eating together. Even the odd flavors are softened by laughter, by the relief that there is still something in the pot. You glance around, noticing tired faces lightening, spirits lifted by even this humble fare. And then you realize something profound. Winter foraging wasn't just about food, it was about hope. Each berry, each root, each strip of seaweed whispered that the land had not abandoned its people. Even under ice and snow, life persisted, waiting to be uncovered. You feel that hope settle into your chest, as warming as the broth itself. Step outside once more. The stars blaze cold and distant. The snow glitters beneath their light. You kneel, scoop up a handful of snow, and imagine the roots, berries, and lichens sleeping beneath. In this frozen silence, you understand that the Vikings' greatest strength was not only their swords or ships, but their stubborn trust that even the smallest gift of the earth could mean survival. You return to the hall, where bowls are scraped clean, laughter fades, and firelight dances across tired faces. The taste of nettles and berries lingers on your tongue, strange, sharp, but somehow comforting. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of the hearth and the knowledge of hidden abundance ease you into the long night. The longhouse glows softly, its rafters darkened by years of smoke. Tonight you notice something different, not the food itself, but the way it is shared. Meals here are never private affairs. Instead, they unfold at the heart of the community in the great hall, where firelight flickers, benches line the walls, and every voice blends into the steady hum of survival. This is where the Vikings ate together, shoulder to shoulder, bound not just by hunger but by fellowship. Archaeologists studying Viking settlements often point to the centrality of the longhouse as more than a home. It was a hall of gathering, feasting, storytelling, and decision-making. At mealtimes, large cauldrons sat over the fire, and everyone dipped from the same pot. The evidence iron cauldrons unearthed, burnt food residues clinging to their sides, shows how communal dining was a defining feature of the Norse winter. You imagine leaning forward with your wooden bowl, waiting your turn as the ladle dips into thick stew. There's a curious note from saga descriptions. Meals often began with the host or chieftain serving portions, a symbolic act of hospitality and authority. To be handed food directly by your leader was to be reminded of your place in the hierarchy, but also of your belonging to the group. Picture a bearded farmer handing you a ladle of meat and grain, his eyes steady, his gesture quiet but full of meaning. In that moment, food was not just sustenance, but a thread binding you into the fabric of the hall. Yet scholars continue to debate how equal these meals truly were. Some argue that hierarchy extended to the pot itself. Chieftains and honored guests received more meat, while common folk ate more broth and bread. Others believe meals were largely communal and fairly shared, since everyone depended on everyone else in winter. The truth may vary with wealth and region. Still, the image of a pot shared by many hands lingers as one of the most powerful emblems of Viking life. You glance around the hall and hear the sounds, the scrape of spoons against bowls, the slurp of broth, the laughter as someone tells a joke. Dogs slink beneath benches, their tails wagging as scraps fall. Children sit cross-legged, porridge smeared on their cheeks, giggling as they mimic the grown-ups. The air is thick with smoke, steam, and the smell of stew meat, roots, herbs, and a hint of salt. It is chaotic, noisy, and oddly comforting. Among the quirks of these communal meals is the Viking habit of passing down food through hands. Bread, sausages, even bowls of porridge travelled along benches, each person taking a portion before sending it onward. The act carried ritual weight. To share food openly was to confirm bonds of trust. Imagine catching a steaming sausage in your hand, tearing off a bite, then tossing it gently to the person beside you, laughter breaking as it lands clumsily in their bowl. You notice, too, how the architecture of the longhouse shaped the experience. The central hearth burned bright, smoke venting slowly through the roof. Light pooled downward, leaving the edges dim. Those closest to the fire were warmer, their bowls steaming more richly, while those farther back sat in half-shadow, clutching thinner portions. Meals reinforced the hierarchy not just in serving but in seating, and you realize how space itself told a story of survival and status. Researchers often puzzle over the exact size of these meals. Some believe the longhouse feasts described in sagas were exaggerated, mythologized for drama. Others argue that archaeology supports them. Enormous cauldrons and cooking pits suggest meals for dozens at once. Was every winter night a feast, or were most meals far humbler than the stories claim? The answer lies somewhere between saga and soil, fact and memory. The sensory details fill your mind as you sit among them. The fire spits, sparks dancing upward. Steam rises in waves, blurring faces into soft halos. A bard begins to recite a story, his voice lifting above the clamour, weaving tales of gods and heroes, while spoons continue their steady rhythm. You taste stew again, barley thick, turnips soft, meat sparse but flavourful. Around you, voices rise and fall like waves, a communal heartbeat carrying the hall through the storm outside. There's an unusual tidbit to note. Sometimes meals ended with hand-washing in communal bowls, not soap but warm water passed along. Imagine dipping your greasy fingers into the basin, the water faintly cloudy, the relief of warmth against chilled skin. Another ritual of sharing, humbler than the meal but just as telling. The debate lingers. Were these meals primarily practical, or did they carry ritual and symbolic weight? Some historians see them as simple necessity, the only efficient way to feed many mouths. Others argue that the act of gathering itself reinforced bonds, reminded everyone of their dependence, and transformed eating into ceremony. You sit in the hall, surrounded by laughter, and realize it is both, necessity and ritual, hunger and fellowship, blended into one nightly rhythm. As the night stretches on, the pot empties. Children doze, dogs curl into corners, and voices soften into murmurs. The hall is still smoky, still crowded, but quieter now. The fire burns lower, casting long shadows across benches and beams. You lean back, bowl empty, stomach warm, and feel the truth settle into you. Survival was never just about what they ate, but how they ate it together, in the glow of firelight, bound by hunger and by trust. You close your eyes. Outside, the storm rages, snow piling against the walls. Inside, the hall breathes with the slow rhythm of sleep, the smell of stew still lingering in the air. Communal meals have ended for the night, but their memory lingers, woven deep into the survival of every winter. The longhouse grows hushed, the embers dimming into a soft red glow. You pull your cloak tighter, though the warmth of the hearth still clings faintly to your skin. Tonight, as the bowls and spoons are set aside, you notice a different kind of meal taking shape, one not only for the living, but for the gods themselves. This is no simple supper, it is sacrifice. Food becomes more than survival here. It becomes an offering, a bridge between mortal hunger and divine favour. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia include animal bones deliberately placed in bogs or burned in ritual pits, suggesting that food offerings were central to Norse religion. Pork and beef, in particular, were often linked to sacrificial feasts. Imagine a priest lifting a carved wooden bowl, brimming with steaming meat and frothy ale, raising it toward the rafters. The smell of fat and smoke fills the air, mingling with chants that roll like thunder through the hall. For a moment, food feeds gods before it feeds people. There's a curious note from saga literature. Sometimes the blood of a sacrificed animal was sprinkled on altars, walls, even the worshippers themselves. It wasn't just the meat that mattered, but the essence of the animal, offered as both nourishment and sacred lifeblood. Picture the crimson drops falling on the floorboards, the flickering fire catching their glimmer, the congregation murmuring prayers of thanks. Survival and faith entwine in that moment, inseparable. And yet, historians continue to debate whether these rituals were as widespread as the sagas suggest. Some argue that grand sacrifices the blot were mostly for elites, held at great seasonal festivals. Others believe even modest households offered small bowls of food or drink, whispering prayers before the hearth. The archaeological record is uneven, leaving us with both images: mighty halls echoing with ritual and quiet families sharing stew with unseen spirits. You sit among them as the ceremony unfolds. A chieftain ladles meat from the cauldron, first offering a portion to the gods. The steam rises, curling into the smoky rafters, as if the gods themselves inhale the scent. Only then is the food passed to the gathered people. The act transforms the meal. It is no longer just sustenance, but communion, linking human hunger to divine will. You take your bowl, the broth thick with pork and barley, and sip slowly, aware of the ritual weight on your tongue. Among the stranger tidbits of Norse lore is the belief that feasting with the gods in this life mirrored the afterlife. Valhalla itself was imagined as an endless banquet, where warriors dined on boar and drank mead each night. To eat sacrificial meat in the longhouse was, in a sense, to rehearse eternity. You close your eyes and hear the laughter, the clash of mugs, the songs rising into the rafters. It is survival, yes, but it is also a taste of the eternal. The fire crackles louder as the ceremony deepens. A skald recites verses praising the gods, weaving tales of Thor's strength, Odin's wisdom, and Freya's bounty. Each bite of meat becomes part of the story, each sip of ale a toast to the divine. You imagine the warmth in your chest not only as calories but as blessing, the food itself transformed into a sacred bond. Researchers still wrestle with the question: did these rituals feed people first, or gods first? Some argue the offerings were symbolic, the gods received through ritual words, while humans enjoyed the actual food. Others believe portions truly were set aside, burned, or buried, never to be touched. The line remains blurred, like smoke drifting upward, leaving us to wonder where the gods ended and the people began. You glance at the faces around you. Some bow their heads in solemnity, others grin as they drink, but all share in the same ritual rhythm. Children watch wide-eyed, learning that food is more than hunger, more than taste. It is part of the cycle of life, death, and faith. Their small hands clutch wooden bowls, their lips whispering along with prayers they don't fully understand. The sensory world deepens as you eat. The stew is rich, flavored with meat freshly slaughtered, thickened with grain, salted just enough to make the flavors sing. The ale is sour but warm, bubbling faintly in your bowl. The air smells of smoke, fat, and herbs, mingled with the faint tang of blood sprinkled earlier. You feel it in your chest, heavy, grounding, sacred. Outside, the storm rages on. Snow lashes against the longhouse, the wind howls like wolves at the door. Yet inside, the ritual meal holds back despair. You see it clearly now. Survival was not just about storing food, it was about finding meaning in it, turning necessity into ceremony, hunger into reverence. By offering food to the gods, the Vikings offered themselves hope that the winter would pass, that the sun would return, that the fields would bloom again. There's an odd little superstition whispered at the edge of the hall. Spilling a drop of ale without toasting the gods might invite misfortune. You imagine someone hastily raising their mug, muttering a quick thanks to Odin after sloshing drink onto the floor. It seems small, even comical, but in a world balanced on survival, such gestures carried weight. Better safe than sorry when the gods might be listening. The night deepens, the bowls are emptied, the cauldron scraped clean, and the priest utters a final blessing. Smoke drifts upward, carrying the scent of meat and ale into the rafters. The hall grows quiet, the storm outside muffled, the people inside heavy with food and faith. You lean back, your belly warm, your mind steady, and you realize something profound. Food was never just food. It was memory, ritual, identity, survival, and promise all simmered together in the same pot. As you drift towards sleep, the echo of the ritual lingers. You hear the faint murmur of prayers, the clink of mugs, the whisper of steam curling into the rafters. You taste the last bite of meat on your tongue, rich and sacred, and you understand that to survive a Viking winter was not only to eat it, was to believe, to offer, and to share that offering with gods and kin alike. The smoke from the ritual still lingers in the beams when you notice another scent drifting through the hall, warm, sharp, and unfamiliar in this otherwise earthy world. You tilt your head, following the aroma to a small pouch carried by a trader recently returned from abroad. He unties the cord, and suddenly the longhouse fills with a perfume that does not belong to the north. Pepper, cinnamon, perhaps even a pinch of cloves. These are tiny luxuries, imported across seas and rivers, proof that the Viking world stretched far beyond its fjords. Archaeological discoveries confirm that exotic spices and herbs made their way into Norse hands. Peppercorns have been found in Viking graves, carried perhaps as status symbols or treasured as rare flavorings. It's not difficult to imagine why, after months of salt, smoke, and sour whey, the sting of pepper on the tongue must have felt miraculous. You picture sprinkling a pinch over a slab of pork, the smell rising in a cloud both strange and intoxicating. There's an unusual tidbit tucked into trade records from Europe. Vikings sometimes exchanged furs, amber, and even slaves for these spices. Such goods passed through Frankish, Byzantine, or Arabic hands before ever reaching the cold north. To think that cinnamon bark, once harvested in faraway forests, found its way into a wooden bowl of porridge in Iceland is almost dizzying. You take a spoonful in your imagination, tasting barley suddenly alive with sweetness and warmth, the spice cutting through monotony like sunlight through fog. But researchers disagree about how common these luxuries were. Some argue they appeared only in the halls of wealthy chieftains or traders, never reaching the bowls of common folk. Others point to scattered finds and suggest that small amounts trickled down into broader households, perhaps saved for festivals or sacrifices. The archaeological trail is slim, a peppercorn here, a fragment of imported vessel there, leaving the debate open. Were spices everyday whispers or rare bursts of brilliance? The answer remains blurred. You sit near the fire as the trader pours a few grains into a woman's hand. She laughs softly, pressing them to her nose, marveling at the sharpness. She grinds them with a stone, sprinkles the dust over a stew of fish and roots. The smell deepens instantly, turning familiar broth into something new. Children lean forward, eyes wide, eager to taste the magic. You join them, lifting your bowl. The flavor surprises you, hot, tingling, a spark on the tongue that lingers long after you swallow. Among the stranger practices, some sagas hint that spices could be used in love charms or medicines. A pinch of exotic powder might be stirred into ale to inspire affection or strength. Imagine a young woman sneaking a grain of pepper into her lover's drink, whispering hopes that the gods themselves would bless the union. Whether true or not, the idea reveals how spices were viewed, not just flavor, but power. The scholarly debate extends further. Were spices valued more for taste or for symbolism? Some historians argue they were practical, treasured for how they lifted heavy meals. Others suggest their value was prestige, proof that one's household had connections stretching across continents. Perhaps both are true. Sitting in the smoky hall, you can sense how even a small pouch of peppercorns could elevate a family's standing, each grain worth more than silver in the right hands. The sounds of the meal echo warmly, spoons clinking, voices rising in surprise at the new taste, laughter spreading. One man sneezes violently after inhaling too much pepper, setting off a chorus of chuckles. You grin too, the sound rolling through the hall, breaking the monotony of winter nights. Spices are not only flavor, they are entertainment, disruption, proof that life holds surprises even in the coldest months. Step outside into the night, the pouch of spices still glowing in your imagination. The storm rages, but you think of the routes that brought those tiny treasures here. Rivers flowing south, ships crossing seas, merchants bargaining in distant markets. Each grain carries with it the sweat of countless hands, the breath of countless lands. To taste pepper in a Viking stew is to taste the world itself. Inside once more, the bowls empty slowly. Children lick the rims, savouring every last spark. The trader tucks his pouch away, the crowd murmuring thanks. The hall grows quieter, but the memory of spice lingers in every breath. You close your eyes, tongue still tingling, belly warm, and you realize that winter survival was not always monotonous. Sometimes, against all odds, it was spiced with the extraordinary. As the fire burns low, you hear someone whisper a toast. May our pots never be bland, and may our trade never fail. The words hang in the smoky air, part blessing, part joke, part truth. You sip the last of your broth, flavored faintly with cinnamon, and smile. In this frozen world, even the smallest taste of the exotic was enough to remind the Vikings that they were never truly alone at the edge of the world. They were part of something vast, far-reaching, and deeply human. The fire in the longhouse pops and sighs, casting ribbons of smoke toward the rafters. The taste of pepper still lingers faintly on your tongue, but now another smell drifts forward, pungent, oily, almost overwhelming. You follow it to a small wooden vessel where thick liquid gleams amber in the firelight. This is no stew, no ale. It is oil pressed from the livers of fish, strong enough to wrinkle your nose. To the Vikings, it was more than food. It was medicine, strength, and sometimes salvation. Excavations of Viking-age middens often reveal large numbers of cod and other fish remains, with liver bones in abundance. Historians believe that livers were prized, not discarded, because of their rich oil. Most evidence suggests that this oil was rendered carefully. Livers boiled or left to ferment, their fat collected in containers for use in food, light, or healing. You imagine a pot simmering by the hearth, the air heavy with the sharp scent of boiling fish, steam rising thick as fog. One unusual practice, mentioned in fragments of folk tradition, describes smearing fish oil directly onto wounds or skin. The idea was that the oil's warmth and richness could protect or heal. Picture a mother gently rubbing pungent oil across her child's cracked hands, whispering comfort as the child grimaces at the smell. Odd, perhaps, but effective enough that later northern communities did the same. You feel the slickness on your own skin just imagining it, the sheen of oil sealing out the cold. And still, experts remain divided on whether fish liver oil was truly a staple or only an occasional remedy. Some argue it was consumed regularly, especially in coastal regions, both as food and as medicine. Others suggest it was more situational, used when fresh meat or dairy grew scarce. The debate continues, as traces of oil in pottery leave questions without final answers. Was this pungent brew part of daily life, or only a winter fallback? The scholarly picture is slippery, like the oil itself. Inside the hall, a bowl of the thick liquid is passed. Some sip it cautiously, eyes watering from the taste. It coats the throat, heavy and strong, leaving behind a heat that feels oddly medicinal. You take a sip in your imagination, and the bitterness spreads across your tongue, followed by a surprising warmth in your chest. It is not pleasant, but it is powerful, a rush of energy that seems to steady your limbs against the cold. Curiously enough, sagas sometimes describe warriors eating fish liver before battle, believing it granted strength or resilience. Imagine a group of men grimacing as they swallow spoonfuls of the oil, then wiping their mouths and raising their weapons. Was it courage they felt, or simply the rush of dense nutrients coursing through them? Perhaps both. You smile softly at the thought, the mingling of superstition and biology in one pungent gulp. The longhouse fills with the sound of coughing and laughter as people react to the taste. Children make faces, sticking out their tongues, while elders nod approvingly, insisting it will keep them strong. The firelight flickers across their cheeks, highlighting both the discomfort and the determination etched there. This is winter survival distilled. Not always pleasant, often difficult, but endured with stubborn humor. You glance toward the cauldron, where livers boil slowly, their smell clinging to every beam. The liquid collects in jars, sealed with cloth or wax, to be used in days ahead. Some is poured into small lamps, flickering weakly but steadily, another echo of the seal oil you saw earlier. Others will be stirred into porridge, diluted with herbs to mask the flavor. In every form, the liver's essence lingers. Scholars point out that such practices may have protected the Vikings more than they realized. Modern science tells us cod liver oil is rich in vitamins A and D, crucial for health in dark winters. Did they notice fewer illnesses, stronger children, brighter skin? Perhaps they only knew that those who drank the oil seemed to fare better. The cause and effect may have been invisible to them, but the results would have been undeniable. Step outside into the frozen night. The sea crashes against the shore, black waves glittering with starlight. Fishermen's voices carry over the wind, their nets heavy with cod. They gut the fish quickly, tossing livers into buckets as precious prizes. The air is alive with the sounds of flapping fish, the hiss of knives, the shouts of men hauling in the catch. You walk among them, the smell of brine and blood filling your lungs, and understand just how deeply the sea fed not only hunger but health. There's a curious belief whispered in some northern traditions that fish livers carried the spirit of the sea itself, granting wisdom to those who consumed them. Imagine an old fisherman, eyes clouded, insisting that every spoonful of oil carried the memory of waves, storms, and creatures below. Was it myth? Certainly. Yet as you watch men lift their catch from icy waters, you can't help but wonder if there is some truth in the idea that survival itself is wisdom. Inside the hall again, the jars of oil are tucked into corners, glowing faintly in the firelight. The air still smells pungent, but people settle more calmly now. Bowls are cleaned, children drift into sleep, and elders murmur blessings for health. You sip once more, grimacing, but already feeling warmth spreading through your body. Strange, unpleasant, but effective, that is the taste of winter medicine. The debate will continue among researchers. Was fish liver oil a staple food, or an occasional cure? Was it traded widely, or consumed only locally? The answers slip away like fish through a net, elusive and shimmering. Yet you know this much. In the depth of winter, when light is scarce and illness lurks, even the foulest taste can become a treasure. As the fire burns low, you close your eyes. The smell of oil clings to your cloak, the taste still heavy on your tongue, and yet your chest feels warmer, your body steadier, your spirit calmer. In this frozen world, even the strangest remedies carried hope. You drift into half-sleep, listening to the sea outside, imagining waves rolling endlessly, carrying both life and mystery to the people who depended on them. The longhouse grows still, only the crackle of embers breaking the silence. You stir, shifting your cloak, and notice movement beneath the benches. Two dogs nose through the rushes on the floor, their tails wagging as they lick at bones tossed aside. Their eyes gleam in the dim light, watchful and eager. Companions who share the winter not just as guardians but as scavengers, thriving on what people leave behind. Tonight you see survival from a different angle, not only through human mouths, but through the animals who lived at their side. Archaeological digs across Viking sites frequently uncover dog bones mixed with household refuse, suggesting these creatures lived intimately among families. Most evidence suggests they ate scraps from the table: fish skins, marrowless bones, gristle too tough for children. You imagine a dog gnawing noisily beneath your feet, crunching on what you considered waste, yet turning it into energy enough to bark at prowlers in the night. There's a rather odd tidbit in some sagas describing dogs as near human in their roles. One tale tells of a faithful hound buried with honors beside its master, a reminder of the bond forged by years of shared meals. You picture a Viking warrior slipping a final bone to his companion before battle, knowing that dog had eaten from the same pot for as long as he could remember. It's strangely touching, this mingling of survival, loyalty, and simple hunger. But experts remain divided on just how much dogs truly depended on scraps versus hunting on their own. Some argue they roamed freely, scavenging from middens or catching small animals. Others suggest they were fed deliberately, part of the family's rhythm of meals. The evidence leaves gaps, as dog bones found in rubbish piles could belong to animals who lived with people or simply strays. The question lingers, much like the sound of paws on wooden floors. Inside the hall, the dog's presence is constant. As people eat, bowls scrape clean, and then scraps fall almost naturally to the floor. The animals pounce, tails wagging, eyes shining. A child giggles as a hound snatches a crust of bread from her hand. An elder grumbles, pretending annoyance, though his fingers quietly flick a piece of fat into the shadows. You feel the warmth of this unspoken sharing, a reminder that survival is rarely a solitary endeavor. Step outside and the picture broadens. Beyond the longhouse, pigs snuffle in pens, goats bleat softly, cows breathe clouds of steam into the frozen air. These animals too lived close with humans, often even brought indoors during the coldest nights. Dogs were not exceptions but part of this living tapestry, where people and beasts depended on one another to endure. You walk among them, the smell of manure and hay rising around you, and realize that winter survival was a chorus of mouths, not a single voice. Among the stranger practices, later lore hints that dogs were sometimes given bones soaked in broth as a treat. It seems simple, yet it points to something deeper: recognition that these animals worked alongside humans, guarding, hunting, pulling sleds, or carrying burdens. To feed them was not indulgence but investment. You picture a hound lapping at a bone heavy with flavor, growling softly in pleasure, then curling up by the hearth, ears twitching at every creak of the longhouse door. Researchers puzzle too over whether dogs were ever seen as a fallback food source in times of famine. Some grim accounts from other northern cultures mention the practice, but Viking evidence remains inconclusive. Most scholars believe dogs were too valuable as companions and protectors, spared even when hunger pressed hard. Yet the absence of certainty leaves a shadow of possibility, one more debate smouldering quietly like embers in the hearth. You sit again near the fire, watching the hounds curl into tight balls at their master's feet. The hall hums softly with sleep, but the dogs remain half alert, ears pricking at every distant sound. Their bellies full of scraps, their loyalty unbroken. They embody a different side of survival. They are the keepers of warmth, the guardians of meat hanging in the rafters, the living reminders that even in scarcity, generosity flows downward. There's something comforting about the rhythm of it. Bread for the child, broth for the elder, scraps for the dog. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. The hounds gnaw on bones until sparks fly from their teeth. The sound steady, soothing. You close your eyes and imagine the cycle repeating each night, a harmony of hunger and satisfaction echoing in the longhouse. Step back into the cold and look up at the stars. The dogs follow you, their breath steaming, their paws crunching softly in the snow. They trot beside you without complaint, loyal as shadows. You realize then that Viking survival wasn't measured only in food hoarded or eaten. It was also in bonds shared, in creatures who guarded homes and warmed hearts in equal measure. Back inside, the longhouse breathes in unison. People sleep, dogs doze, and the fire burns low. A single bone rolls across the floor, nudged by a paw, and a hound settles contentedly over it. You smile softly, the image imprinting itself in your mind. Winter was cruel, but not without companionship. Even in hunger there was sharing. Even in scarcity, there was loyalty. As you drift into half-sleep, the smell of marrow and fish skins lingers faintly. You hear the steady crunch of teeth, the soft thud of tails against wood, and you know the story of Viking food includes not just the people who cooked and ate, but the animals who shared their scraps. It is a reminder that survival is never a single story. It is a tapestry of beings, human and animal alike, all bound together under the weight of snow. The longhouse breathes with a steady rhythm, men and women asleep on benches, children curled beneath furs, dogs twitching in dreams at their feet. Yet not all winters were as calm as this one. Some nights carried darker stories, whispered in sagas, and passed down in quiet tones. You step outside into the snow, the sky black and endless, and the silence presses on your chest. In years when the harvest failed, when storms wrecked the fishing boats, when disease struck the herds, the Vikings faced famine. And famine meant desperation meals, so strange and grim that they haunt memory centuries later. Archaeological evidence shows that lean years did scar communities. Layers of ash and burned bones in some sites suggest not feasts but last resorts, bones boiled until brittle, bark stripped from trees, even leather softened and eaten. You imagine kneeling by a cauldron where strips of boiled hide swirl in cloudy water, the smell sharp and acrid. The broth offers little, but when hunger gnaws at every rib, even boiled leather becomes a meal. There is a rather unsettling tidbit tucked into later folk accounts. People sometimes ground tree bark into flour, mixing it with barley to stretch their bread. The loaves were dark, bitter, and tough, known as famine bread. Picture biting into one, the taste woody, your teeth scraping against grit, yet swallowing anyway because it kept you alive one more day. You feel the bitterness linger on your tongue just imagining it. Historians remain divided over how often such extreme measures were taken. Some argue they were rare, confined to years of true disaster. Others believe famine foods were more common, part of a seasonal cycle when stores ran thin before spring's renewal. The evidence is difficult to pin down. Pits with odd residues, fragments of bark and bones, sagas filled with grim hints. Was famine the exception or a rhythm always waiting in the background? The question hangs heavy. Inside the longhouse you see the shadows of such times. A pot simmers with almost nothing in it, water cloudy with the faintest trace of meat. A woman drops in scraps of bark, her hands trembling, children watching silently. They know the broth will taste bitter, but they are too weak to protest. You sit with them, bowl in hand, sip the hot liquid. It burns your throat, the flavor sharp, almost resinous, but the warmth still spreads into your chest. It is not nourishment, it is survival, thin and fragile. Among the stranger practices in desperate winters was the boiling of bones again and again until nothing remained, not even flavor. The water was then drunk like medicine, more ritual than food. Imagine holding a bowl of hot, nearly tasteless liquid, telling yourself it will ease your hunger. The comfort was as much psychological as physical, yet even that mattered when the belly cried out. Step outside and you hear the hollow quiet of famine. No laughter from the hall, no songs rising with ale. The snow muffles everything, the air sharper, harsher. Dogs scavenge desperately, gnawing old wood or licking the frost. The barns are silent, no cattle lowing, no goats bleating. In the distance, a raven caws, its wings black against the grey sky, as though mocking the silence of empty fields. Scholars still argue whether famine-shaped Norse expansion did hunger push families to sail west, to raid south, to seek land where winters were less cruel. Some point to tales of settlers in Greenland and Iceland, struggling against short summers and thin soils, their survival precarious from the start. Others suggest ambition and trade drove expansion more than hunger. The truth may weave both together, desire sharpened by need, opportunity intertwined with survival. There is an odd belief recorded in fragments of saga lore. In some places, famine was blamed not on weather or luck, but on curses. Witches, angry neighbors, even the gods themselves might be accused of withholding food. Imagine a village gathering, voices raised in anger, looking for someone to blame while their stomachs growl. It's a reminder that hunger was not only physical, it was spiritual, social, and emotional. You sit again in the longhouse, the air cold, the fire barely burning. The people are gaunt, their cheeks hollow, their eyes dim. They sip thin broth, gnaw bark bread, chew boiled leather. The silence is broken only by coughs, the crackle of fire, the distant wind pressing at the walls. You lift your bowl, sip the bitter liquid, and feel despair mingle with determination. Even in famine they endured. Even when the food was strange, foul, or barely food at all, they clung to life. And yet, curiously, these stories of famine are balanced by tales of resilience. Sagas speak of people who gave away their last crust to a neighbor, or hunters who walked miles through snow to find even a rabbit. The very fact that such stories exist proves that famine was not always the end. Survival, however thin, was possible. You can feel the quiet pride in those whispers. We lived, even then. The scholarly picture is far from settled. Were these famine foods rare oddities, or did every household face them in some form, every winter? You cannot decide, standing in the smoky gloom, sipping bark broth. What you can feel is the weight of hunger pressing down like snow on a roof. And you understand. Famine was the shadow always waiting, the cold hand at the edge of every Viking winter, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. The fire dies low. You lean back, belly filled with bitterness, heart filled with empathy. Outside, the snow falls silently, covering empty fields, frozen rivers, barren forests. Inside, the people cling together, their bodies weak, but their will unbroken. You close your eyes, the taste of bark bread still on your tongue, and you know this too is part of the Viking story, not just feasts and raids, but famine and endurance, hunger and hope. The bitter memory of famine lingers in your mind as you stir awake once more. Yet tonight, the longhouse smells different, sharper, sour, almost mouth-watering in a strange way. You follow the scent to a row of clay jars tucked against the wall. Their lids are sealed with wax or cloth, and as one is pried open, steam and brine rise into the air. The Vikings, clever in their thrift, had another weapon against hunger: pickling. From turnips to cabbages, vegetables were steeped in sour brine, transformed into food that could last through the cruelest months. Archaeological studies of early Scandinavian sites show vessels with residues of lactic acid bacteria, strong evidence of fermentation and pickling. It's well established that root crops like turnips, carrots, and sometimes even kale could be preserved this way. Picture yourself leaning over one of these jars, the smell sharp, vinegary, tickling your nose. You dip your fingers in, pull free a pale slice of turnip, its flesh firm yet yielding. You take a bite, sour, crisp, refreshing against the monotony of heavy stews. There's a curious tidbit in later Nordic folklore about how pickling brine itself was sometimes drunk as a tonic. The salty, sour liquid was thought to ease digestion and revive tired bodies. Imagine a Viking farmer tipping back a wooden cup, swallowing brine with a grimace, then sighing as warmth spreads in his chest. Strange as it sounds, the practice echoes into modern times, where sour tonics are still seen as cures for weariness. But researchers remain divided about how widely fermentation was practiced in the Viking Age. Some argue it was commonplace, an everyday strategy of preservation, accessible to nearly every household. Others believe it was more occasional, tied to regions with better access to salt or specific types of storage jars. The debate continues, with pottery fragments and chemical residues leaving tantalizing but incomplete clues. Was pickling a staple or a luxury? The answer stays submerged, like vegetables under brine. Step closer to the hearth where tonight's jar has been opened. Women lift slices of pickled turnip from the liquid and add them to bowls of broth. The sourness brightens the dish, cutting through the fat of pork and the heaviness of barley. Children chew eagerly, their faces lighting at the tang. You try a bite in your imagination, the flavor sharp and lively, your mouth watering even as your eyes wince. After weeks of bland bread and roots, the taste is almost electric. Among the more unusual practices, pickled foods sometimes accompanied offerings to gods or spirits. A jar of fermented vegetables might be placed at a shrine, its sour aroma rising like incense. Imagine setting a bowl of pickled cabbage before a carved wooden idol, whispering prayers that the gods would keep the winter short. It is an odd gift, yet meaningful proof that even humble vegetables, transformed by time and brine, carried spiritual weight. Inside the hall, laughter rises as people snack on these sour treats. One man jokes that pickled turnips bite harder than any wolf. Another sneezes after inhaling the sharp scent, setting off a chorus of chuckles. The fire glows warmly, faces flush with sour delight, and for a moment, winter feels less heavy. You can sense the psychological lift, as if the sharpness of the food cuts through not just fat but gloom. Scholars often ask, did fermentation make Viking diets healthier in ways they didn't understand? Modern science suggests yes, lactic acid preserves vitamins, aids digestion, and fights harmful bacteria. To the Vikings, it may simply have been practical, yet the hidden benefits were immense. You sip the broth flavored with brine, and you feel not only warmth but vitality. Whether by accident or instinct, they discovered a way to carry summer's nutrients into winter's depths. Step outside into the snow, jar in hand. You walk along the frozen field, the wind sharp against your cheeks, and think of the roots pulled from this soil months ago. They were buried, chopped, salted, sealed away, and now, long after the harvest, they return in a new form, bright, sour, and alive. You crunch a slice between your teeth, the sound loud in the stillness, and smile at the resilience packed into such a humble bite. There's a peculiar image that lingers from some accounts, travelers carrying jars of pickled food with them on journeys. Imagine a Viking raider crouched on the deck of a ship, gnawing a sour turnip while waves crash against the hull, or a trader stopping along a snowy path, opening a jar to refresh himself with a bite of cabbage. Sourness becomes not only sustenance but companion, steady and reliable as the seasons. Back inside, the jars are sealed once more, tucked safely into corners where the frost cannot reach. Families sit with satisfied expressions, bellies full of tangy broth. Children giggle at the taste still lingering on their tongues, licking their lips, asking for more. The dogs sniff curiously but recoil at the sourness, to the amusement of the crowd. For a while, the hall hums with joy, softened by this unexpected brightness. The scholarly debate may continue whether pickling was common, whether it reached every household, whether it was luxury or norm, but as you sit here, the sour taste still sharp in your mouth, you feel the truth more clearly than words. This food mattered. It broke the monotony, preserved health, and lifted spirits. It was more than nourishment, it was a reminder that ingenuity could carve life from the bleakest months. The fire dies low. You lean back, your stomach settled, your lips still tingling from vinegar bite. Outside, the snow falls softly, blanketing the land in silence. Inside, jars of pickled roots rest patiently in the dark, waiting for the next storm, the next hunger, the next night, when sourness will once again taste like hope. The sharp tang of pickled roots lingers faintly in the air, but another smell soon takes its place, thick, sweet, and a little smoky. You lean closer to the fire and see a pot bubbling with something unusual. Golden liquid glistens in the dim light, slowly thickening as it simmers. This is syrup, drawn not from sugarcane or honey, but from trees themselves. In some northern regions, Vikings are believed to have tapped birch or maple, drawing sap and reducing it into sweet liquid. It is rare, fleeting, but precious, a taste of sweetness coaxed from the frozen forest. Archaeological evidence is scant, but scholars note that birch sap tapping is an old tradition across Scandinavia, stretching back well before the medieval period. In spring especially, sap was collected for drinking, fresh and watery, a tonic after the long winter. Some suggest the Vikings boiled it down to syrup, using it as both sweetener and preservative. Imagine thrusting a wooden spile into the bark, watching clear drops fall into a vessel. then carrying the liquid home to boil. The smell is faintly woody, the taste crisp and clean, almost like water kissed by sunlight. A curious tidbit appears in later folklore. Sap was sometimes fermented into a mild alcoholic drink, sharp and lightly sweet. Picture a farmer leaning against a tree in spring, sipping the pale brew with a grin, grateful for something other than sour whey or heavy ale. It seems likely the Vikings experimented with these gifts, turning even tree sap into survival's companion. But historians remain divided. Some argue that tree tapping was too laborious, too seasonal, to have played a major role in winter food. Others counter that sap could be collected and preserved in syrup, adding variety to an otherwise monotonous diet. The debate lingers, with little hard proof, yet the idea persists like the sweet smell wafting from the pot before you. Inside the longhouse, the syrup is drizzled sparingly over porridge. The barley grains glisten, steam curling upward as children squeal with delight. They lick the sweetness from their spoons, their cheeks sticky, their eyes wide. You try it in your imagination. Thick, nutty porridge suddenly alive with golden notes, the sweetness bright but not overwhelming. After so much salt and sour, it is almost decadent. Among the stranger practices, some traditions mention sap used in poultices, mixed with herbs to soothe wounds or coughs. You picture a healer stirring syrup into a clay pot with dried nettles, smearing the mixture over a sick man's chest, whispering charms as she works. Food and medicine, once again, blur into one. The line between nourishment and healing fades like mist in firelight. The scholarly debate continues. Was this syrup a luxury, a seasonal delight, or a staple preserved carefully in jars? Some argue only wealthier families could afford the time and fuel to reduce sap. Others believe it was widespread, though modest, filling jars in spring that lasted into winter. You sip the porridge again in your mind, and you cannot decide. All you know is the sweetness clings to your lips, softening the harshness of winter's diet. The sounds of the hall rise as the syrup spreads. Laughter bubbles, spoons clink, voices murmur in satisfaction. One child licks his bowl clean, setting off chuckles from his neighbors. Another tries to steal an extra spoonful, chased by his sister across the benches. The sweetness has lifted not only the food but the mood itself. You smile, realizing how something so small can ripple into warmth across an entire hall. Step outside, the night sharp against your skin. The birch trees stand silent, their white bark gleaming in the moonlight. You touch one, running your hand over its cold trunk, and imagine the sap coursing within, hidden, waiting for spring. The forest itself holds sweetness, subtle and patient, a reminder that survival is not only about meat and roots but about noticing gifts where others see only silence. Back inside, the jars of syrup are sealed once more, stored away like treasure. The firelight dances on their golden surfaces, casting tiny suns in the shadows. Families settle into sleep, bellies soothed, spirits lifted. The dogs lick at sticky fingers, tails wagging. The hall hums with quiet joy, sweeter than usual, softer, brighter. There is an odd superstition whispered among a few, that trees which gave sap carried blessings, their spirits appeased by gentle tapping. To take without thanks might anger the forest. To tap with gratitude might ensure abundance. You picture a farmer patting the bark of a birch, murmuring thanks as sap drips into his bucket, acknowledging the silent generosity of the living world. You close your eyes, your tongue still carrying the ghost of sweetness. The longhouse fades into drowsy warmth, the storm outside softened by the thought that even in the hardest winters, sweetness was possible. It might come rarely, in drops or jars, but it was enough to remind the Vikings that survival was not just bitter endurance. Sometimes, it was syrup simmering slowly over fire, a gift from trees whispering patience through the snow. The sweetness of syrup fades on your lips, but in its place another flavor emerges, earthy, nutty, and oddly comforting. Tonight, in the glow of the hearth, A small sack is opened, spilling its treasures across the table. Hazelnuts tumble out, round and smooth, glinting in the firelight. Alongside them, walnuts, acorns, and perhaps a few chestnuts gathered in autumn. Nuts, humble and often overlooked, carried the essence of forests into Viking winters, offering both food and resilience. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia frequently reveal hazelnut shells in abundance, charred or discarded in fire pits. These finds suggest nuts were not occasional luxuries but important seasonal staples, harvested in bulk and stored through winter. You imagine families in autumn walking the forests, children scampering ahead, hands full of nuts gathered from the undergrowth. The crisp sound of cracking shells fills the air, laughter rising as baskets grow heavy. Stored in sacks, hidden in cool corners, these forest gifts waited patiently for the months of scarcity. A quirky detail emerges from some finds: large caches of hazelnuts deliberately buried, possibly as reserves or even ritual offerings. Imagine digging into the soil months later to retrieve a secret store, the nuts still safe, dry, and edible. It is a simple but brilliant form of preservation, the earth itself becoming pantry and guardian. You crouch in the cold, scraping away frost, lifting a handful of nuts from hidden earth, their shells smooth and hard, their promise unbroken. Yet scholars continue to debate just how central nuts were to Viking diets. Some argue they were everyday food, cracked and eaten raw or roasted by the fire. Others suggest they were seasonal treats, more symbolic of autumn's abundance than winter's survival. The uneven evidence leaves the picture incomplete, forcing us to imagine both possibilities: nights filled with steady cracking, or rare evenings when nuts emerged as delights. Inside the longhouse, the cracking begins. Stones strike shells, children giggle as kernels pop free, dogs hover close for scraps. The sound is sharp and rhythmic, echoing through the smoky air like a second heartbeat. You hold a hazelnut between your teeth, bite gently, and taste its richness spread across your tongue. It is not sweet, not sharp, but steady, fatty, earthy, grounding. A handful fills your stomach more than bread, lingering longer in your chest. Among the stranger practices, some sagas hint that nuts carried romantic symbolism. Hazelnuts, in particular, were said to inspire love or fertility. Picture a young couple sharing a roasted handful at the edge of a fire, their laughter mingling, their hands brushing as they reach for the same nut. A small moment, perhaps exaggerated in memory, but one that reveals how even food could carry meanings beyond hunger. Scholars still puzzle over whether nuts were eaten alone or mixed into dishes. Some evidence suggests they were ground into meal, blended with barley flour to stretch bread or thicken porridge. Imagine stirring porridge dotted with crushed hazelnuts, the smell warm and nutty, the texture richer than usual. Each bite offers not only sustenance but variety, a shift from monotony that makes winter more bearable. The hall grows lively with the sound of cracking shells. Sparks fly from the fire, laughter rises, stories unfold as hands work steadily. The dogs crunch discarded shells, tails wagging furiously. Children show off their piles of kernels, proud of their skill in cracking. You smile at the sight, realizing that nuts brought not only food but entertainment, a rhythm that filled long nights with small joys. Step outside into the crisp night. The forest looms, bare branches scratching against the sky. You picture it in autumn, alive with color, nuts falling in abundance, families scrambling to gather them before squirrels could. The memory of harvest lingers in each bite now, a reminder that even in barren winter, the forest's gifts remain. You crack another nut between your teeth, the sound loud against the silence, and taste the earth itself, enduring and generous. There's a curious fragment of folklore suggesting that acorns, though bitter, were sometimes leached and ground into meal. You imagine the labor soaking them in water to draw out tannins, drying them, pounding them into flour. The bread made from such meal must have been heavy, bitter, but edible. Was it desperation food, or simply another form of resourcefulness? The question lingers, like the aftertaste of bitterness on your tongue. Back inside, the bowls of nuts are passed hand to hand. Some are roasted over the fire, their shells cracking open with sharp pops, the smell toasty and inviting. You bite into one, the kernel warm, softer, its flavor deeper. Children clap at the noise, chasing after shells that jump from the flames. The hall fills with warmth not only from the fire, but from the shared joy of these small, crackling feasts. Historians argue still, were nuts more important for calories or for morale? Did they keep bodies alive or spirits alight? Perhaps both. As you watch the scene before you, faces glowing, laughter rising, you feel the answer is not either divided by or. Nuts were food, yes, but they were also symbols of autumn's memory, reminders that the world outside still gave, even when buried in snow. The night deepens, the cracking slows, the sacks are tied, the kernels tucked away for tomorrow. Dogs curl into sleep, children drowse, elders nod by the fire. The hall hums softly, the air rich with nutty warmth. You close your eyes, the taste still on your tongue, the sound of cracking shells echoing like distant drums. And you know, survival was not only salted meat and sour whey, it was also hazelnuts cracked by firelight, laughter shared, and the forest remembered in every bite. The crackle of nutshells fades into silence, and now the hall smells faintly of earth and clay. In the corner, you notice something different, a cluster of barrels and pots, sealed with lids of wood and wax. A man pries one open, and steam bursts upward, rich with the scent of fermentation. The Vikings were no strangers to brewing. Ale, beer, and mead were more than drink. They were liquid bread, liquid cheer, liquid strength against the cold. Tonight you watch as these brews become both food and fellowship. Archaeologists have uncovered residues of barley, honey, and even herbs in Viking pottery, strong evidence of brewing. Barley especially was central, sprouted and dried to create malt, then boiled and fermented. Imagine standing by the cauldron as grain bubbles in hot water, steam rolling into the rafters. The smell is nutty, yeasty, thick with promise. Later, yeast wild or preserved from past batches transforms it into froth, the liquid alive with bubbles. You lift a horn of ale in your imagination, the foam prickling your lip, the taste sour, grainy, hearty. It is not just drink, it is sustenance. One quirky tidbit surfaces in saga lore. Sometimes beer was flavored with wild herbs like yarrow or juniper instead of hops, which were less common then. The result was bitter, fragrant, sometimes even intoxicating in strange ways. You picture a man sipping a too strong brew, laughing a little too loudly, convinced the gods themselves whispered in his ear. In a world where monotony ruled, a hint of herbs in ale turned survival into celebration. But scholars still debate how central alcohol truly was in daily diets. Some argue that ale was consumed constantly, safer than water and filling as grain. Others suggest that only wealthier farms brewed regularly, with poorer households drinking weak, gruel-like beer when possible. The evidence vessels with residues, sagas filled with feasting leaves both possibilities open. Did every Viking child sip ale with meals, or was it rarer, saved for gatherings? The answer flows uncertain, like froth over a horn's rim. Inside the longhouse, the brewing is alive. Men stir vats with heavy paddles, women ladle froth into smaller jars, children run errands with wooden cups. The air smells thick, yeasty, almost intoxicating even before the first sip. A horn is lifted, passed hand to hand. Laughter rises, stories bloom, songs are sung. You take a drink in your imagination. Warm, slightly sour, grainy but satisfying. It spreads heat through your chest, easing the cold that clings even indoors. Among the stranger practices, some accounts hint that mead-fermented honey wine was brewed not only for feasts but for healing. Mixed with herbs, it became tonic or charm. Imagine a healer pouring mead into a cup, stirring in thyme and nettle, handing it to a sick child. Whether the cure was physical or psychological, the sweetness alone must have felt like medicine. You taste it in your mind, honey glowing against bitterness, a drink that soothes and strengthens at once. The debate lingers over mead especially. Was it common or rare as treasure? Some scholars insist honey was too scarce for everyday brewing, leaving mead to elites. Others point to small-scale beekeeping and wild hives, suggesting modest batches could be made more often than assumed. The sagas exaggerate, perhaps, but in the smoky hall tonight, you sense the truth lies between mead flowing at feasts, ale steady for daily meals. The sensory world deepens as the night unfolds. Horns clink, froth drips down beards, laughter shakes the rafters. Dogs bark at the noise, tails wagging, while children sneak sips and cough at the sharpness. Songs rise, long and winding, tales of Thor's hammer and Odin's wisdom, each verse punctuated by another drink. The fire glows brighter, the hall warmer, and the storm outside forgotten for a while. Step into the night air. The cold slaps you awake, but the warmth of ale still burns in your chest. You see barrels stacked by the wall, covered in snow, each one a reservoir of comfort waiting to be tapped. Beyond the hall, fields lie barren, but here, barley has been transformed into strength. You realize survival was not only about what filled the belly, it was about what lifted the spirit, what bound people together in laughter against the darkness. There's an odd fragment of lore claiming some warriors drank heavily before battle to dull fear. You picture men gulping strong ale, staggering but fearless, their courage not from gods but from fermented grain. Was it wise? Perhaps not. But in their minds, bravery and drink intertwined, survival resting as much in spirit as in flesh. Back inside, the songs soften. Horns are emptied, heads grow heavy, laughter fades into drowsy murmurs. Children sleep, dogs curl close, elders snore gently by the fire. The air still smells of yeast, honey, herbs, and smoke. You sip the last of your horn, the froth gone flat, the taste lingering like memory. Historians may never agree fully. Was ale daily sustenance, or occasional indulgence? Was mead common or rare? Did brewing unite every household, or only the wealthier ones? The debates will continue, as frothy and unsettled as the drink itself. But here, in the glow of the longhouse, you feel the truth brewing was more than calories. It was celebration, ritual, medicine, and laughter all poured into the same horn. You lean back, your eyes heavy, your stomach warm, your mind drifting. The fire hums, the storm howls faintly beyond, but inside the hall, the memory of ale still bubbles. Survival, you realize, was not only about enduring hunger, but about finding joy even in scarcity. And nothing captured that better than the froth of a shared drink in winter's heart. The fire has dimmed, and the echoes of songs sung over frothy ale still vibrate faintly in the beams. Yet when you shift in your cloak, your stomach rumbles, reminding you that not every meal was hearty or sweet. Some nights, food meant simplicity, a meal built from the land itself with little more than patience and endurance. You watch as a woman kneels beside the hearth, setting flat stones near the flames, then spreading a thin mixture of grain and water over their hot surfaces. The smell rises nutty, smoky, humble. This is flatbread, the simplest of Viking meals, and tonight it carries the hall through another long night. Archaeological finds of small, scorched bread fragments, particularly from fire pits, suggest flatbreads were an everyday staple. Made quickly, without yeast, they required little more than flour, water, and heat. Imagine holding one between your fingers, round, rough, edges crisp, surface blistered with tiny burns from the stone. The texture is chewy, the flavor earthy. It is not luxurious, but it is steady, filling, reliable bread stripped to its essence. Curiously, some sagas describe warriors carrying these breads into battle, tucked against their belts or inside pouches. Portable and durable, they were a soldier's ration, as vital as his sword. You picture a Viking raider crouched on a rocky shore, tearing at a piece of flatbread before charging into combat, his jaw working steadily, his spirit bolstered by even this modest fuel. Food and war, survival and conquest, bound together in a single bite. Still, historians debate whether flatbread was truly universal. Some argue that barley gruel or porridge was more common for everyday meals, with bread reserved for wealthier households or travel. Others counter that flatbread's simplicity made it accessible to everyone. The burnt crumbs and charred remains scattered across settlements whisper evidence, but not certainty. Was this nightly bread for all, or for some? The answer shifts like smoke above the fire. Inside the longhouse, the rhythm of preparation is calm. Dough is rolled thin on wooden boards, dusted with coarse flour, then pressed onto stones warmed by the fire. The smell is comforting, grainy, toasty, faintly smoky. Children wait eagerly, eyes shining, their fingers twitching to grab the first rounds. Dogs sit close too, their noses quivering, tails thumping softly against the rushes. You take a bite in your imagination. The flatbread cracks, edges brittle, center chewy. The taste is plain, but you dip it into broth, and suddenly it soaks up flavor, softening, swelling, transforming into something greater. With salted fish, it becomes savory. With honey, sweet. With sour whey, tangy. Its strength lies not in richness, but in versatility, a canvas for survival's palate. Among the more peculiar customs, some later traditions describe stamping bread with small symbols or cross marks before baking. While most of that comes from later Christian practice, it's tempting to imagine Vikings marking their flatbreads two symbols for luck, protection, or simply decoration. You picture a mother pressing a thumbprint into dough, murmuring a quiet wish for her child's health, then handing over the bread with a smile. The scholarly debate continues. Was bread only food, or also symbol? Did it carry ritual meaning, or was it strictly practical? Some point to burial finds with bread fragments, as proof it travelled with souls into the afterlife. Others caution against reading too much into crumbs. Yet as you chew in your mind, you sense that bread so simple, so constant, couldn't help but gather meanings, even if none were spoken aloud. The hall hums as people eat. Children gnaw edges, elders soften pieces in bowls of stew, dogs crunch happily at scraps. The air smells of toasted grain and smoke, an aroma that fills the rafters with comfort. No one laughs loudly tonight, no songs rise, but there is peace in this quiet meal. Flatbread may not inspire celebration, but it carries families through night after night, steady as the heartbeat of the longhouse. Step outside, the snow crunching underfoot, your breath steaming in the air. You look toward the forest, barren and black, and imagine how simple bread would taste after a day spent cutting wood or hauling nets. Not a feast, but enough. You break a piece in your hand, steam rising faintly, and chew while the cold presses around you. It tastes like survival, pure and unadorned. There's a small quirk in later Scandinavian lore. Flatbread was sometimes compared to shields, both round, both protective, both constant companions in Viking life. You smile at the thought bread as edible armor, guarding not the body in battle but the belly against hunger. It's poetic in a quiet, practical way. Back inside, the stones are cleared, the last bread stacked in a small basket. Families lean back, full enough, content enough. Children drift into sleep, crumbs on their lips, while dogs curl close, tails twitching in dreams. The fire burns low, shadows flicker, the hall breathes in slow unison. You finish your last piece, the flavor plain but grounding, and feel a calm settle over you. Historians may argue forever about the place of bread in Viking diets, but tonight you sense the truth. It was not feast or famine, not rare or exotic, not symbolic or grand. It was flatbread modest, steady, enduring. You close your eyes, the taste still on your tongue, and know that sometimes the simplest food is the strongest thread, binding life through the long, cold dark. The taste of flatbread still lingers, plain and grounding, when another pot is dragged close to the hearth. The smell that rises is unmistakably different, sharp, tangy, and sour enough to make your lips pucker before the first sip. This is skyer, or something close to it. Fermented dairy, curdled and churned, thickened into a food that could last long past fresh milk's brief life. If flatbread was survival in solid form, this was survival in a bowl milk transformed by time, bacteria, and necessity. Archaeological residues of lactic acid bacteria in Viking pottery strongly suggest fermentation of milk was routine. Iceland, in particular, preserved the tradition of skyer sour, yogurt-like curds that echo what their ancestors likely ate. Imagine dipping a wooden spoon into a clay bowl, lifting a thick, white dollop that clings stubbornly. You taste it in your imagination, tart, creamy, faintly sweet at the edges. It bites at your tongue, then soothes your belly with richness. There's a quirky tidbit from later sagas. Warriors sometimes carried dried skyer balls, rehydrating them with water or whey on journeys. Portable, durable, lightweight. It was the perfect travel ration. You picture a sailor chewing a tough ball of dried curd, grimacing at the sourness, but thankful for the energy it gave as waves crashed over the deck. A strange snack, yes, but practical enough to endure centuries. Historians still debate whether skyer itself existed in the Viking Age or only emerged clearly later. Some argue that evidence is indirect, pointing only to general fermented milk products. Others counter that continuity in Icelandic food traditions makes skyer almost certain. The truth lies hazy, but the sour tang in your mouth feels real enough, whether or not it bore the same name 1,000 years ago. Inside the longhouse, families eat bowls of sour curds mixed with barley. The children wrinkle their noses at the sharpness, then smile when honey is stirred in, softening the bite. Elders dip bread into it, the plain grain lifted by tang. Dogs sniff curiously, then lick the bowls when they are empty. The hall hums with small sounds, spoons scraping clay, laughter at puckered faces, the sigh of contentment when bellies fill. Among the stranger uses, sour whey, the liquid drained from curds, was drunk as a beverage or used for pickling. Imagine lifting a cup of cloudy, acidic liquid, swallowing quickly, and coughing at its sharpness. It is not pleasant, but it is hydrating, nutritious, and endlessly renewable. As long as milk flowed, you picture a woman pouring whey into a jar of roots, sealing them tight, using its acidity as natural preservative. What began as byproduct becomes lifeline. Scholars note too that fermented dairy may have helped Vikings tolerate milk despite the high rates of lactose intolerance in northern Europe at the time. Fresh milk could cause sickness, but fermentation broke it down, turning hazard into nourishment. Was this knowledge deliberate or accidental? Did they notice only that curdled milk didn't make them ill? The debate continues, but the result was survival made safer through sourness. The sensory details fill the hall. Steam rises from bowls, the air sharp with dairy tang, the fire hissing as drops fall. You take another spoonful, the sourness making your mouth water, your stomach settling with its weight. It is not indulgent, but it is refreshing, a break from fat and salt, a reminder that food could be lively even in darkness. Step outside into the cold. The cows in their stalls breathe heavily, their bodies warm, their milk the starting point for these strange, enduring dishes. You run your hand over a cow's rough hide, hear the steady crunch of hay, smell the musk of animals sheltering through winter. From them came butter, cheese, and now this sour curd, a chain of transformation that turned grass into survival, season after season. Back inside, the bowls empty slowly. A boy licks his spoon, eyes wide, his face smeared white. A girl sneaks another scoop, giggling as her brother scowls. Elders sit with contentment, knowing this meal stretches their supplies further. The fire crackles, laughter rises, the sour tang thickens the air. A peculiar belief in later tradition suggests fermented dairy was linked to strength, sometimes given to brides before marriage or warriors before journeys. Imagine a bride sipping sour curds, grimacing, then laughing, her family cheering at the omen of health, or a young man gulping whey before setting out to sea, believing it would steady him against the waves. Myth and food entwined, survival flavored with meaning. The scholarly debate endures. Was sky a daily fare or a rarity? Did every household ferment, or only some? Were these bowls feasts or merely routine? The evidence cannot decide, but as you taste the sour tang again in your mind, you realize the distinction may not matter. What mattered was endurance, the cleverness of turning fragile milk into something that survived the cold. The night softens, bowls are stacked, spoons set aside, children yawning, dogs licking at scraps. The fire burns low, shadows stretch long, the hall breathes with slow rhythm. You lean back, your lips still tingling with sourness, your stomach steady with curd. Outside the snow deepens, but inside, the taste of survival clings to you tart, sharp, enduring. The tang of fermented milk still clings to your tongue when the smell of something richer drifts from the hearth. Tonight, a shallow pan hisses as fat melts, golden drops sizzling against iron. A woman stirs carefully, her hands steady, while the fire crackles beneath. This is not stew or porridge. It is butter being churned, clarified, and stored. In the Viking winter, butter and rendered fats were more than flavor. They were fuel, warmth, and wealth wrapped into one. Archaeological finds give us glimpses of this world. Butter churn fragments appear in Norse settlements, while residues of dairy fats cling to clay pots. Written records from later centuries even describe bog butter, blocks buried in peat to preserve them for months or years. Imagine stumbling across a lump of pale, waxy butter dug from earth, still edible after seasons underground. The thought is strange, but to the Vikings, it was practical, a hidden vault of calories against famine. There's a curious tidbit in medieval accounts. Some wealthy households used butter not only for food but as a symbol of status. To serve butter generously was to declare abundance. Picture a feast where guests spread thick layers on flatbread, golden grease dripping onto their fingers, laughter rolling as they licked it clean. In a land of scarcity, that shine of fat was luxury itself. And yet, scholars still debate the scale of dairy fat use. Some argue that butter was everyday food, common even in poorer households. Others suggest it was rarer, requiring surplus milk and careful churning, more often seen in wealthier farms. The evidence is patchy, leaving the truth somewhere between sometimes abundant, sometimes scarce, but always precious when present. Inside the longhouse, the butter is ready. It glows faintly in the firelight, smooth and golden, soft under the spoon. Children crowd close, their eyes wide, as a woman spreads it on warm bread. You take a bite in your imagination. The bread soaks with richness, the fat melting instantly on your tongue, coating your mouth with warmth. It is indulgent compared to sour whey or bark bread dense energy you can feel spreading through your chest. Among the stranger practices, rendered fat tallow from cattle or lard from pigs was often poured into lamps. Food became light, shimmering faintly in smoky air. You watch a man trim a wick floating in fat, the flames small but steady, illuminating the faces gathered around it. To eat fat was to live, to burn it was to see. It gave survival not only in calories but in brightness against the endless dark. Scholars wonder too about the role of fat in trade. Some argue that butter and tallow traveled in barrels to foreign markets, exchanged for salt, grain, or luxury goods. Others caution that most stayed local, consumed quickly in winter. The archaeological silence leaves the question open, but you imagine a ship creaking under the weight of barrels filled not with silver or spices, but with pale blocks of butter, as valuable in their way as gold. The sensory world grows stronger as you sit near the hearth. Butter pops in the pan, sending droplets hissing onto hot stones. The smell is nutty, rich, almost overwhelming. A spoon scrapes the bottom, lifting golden liquid into jars where it cools and solidifies. Children lick their fingers, their faces glowing. Dogs beg at the edges, tails thumping, tongues eager for scraps. The hall hums with anticipation, the air thick with fat and fire. Step outside into the night. The cold cuts sharp, your breath white in the air. You imagine carrying a small crock of butter across the snow, its contents as precious as treasure. A spoonful would mean warmth, a smear on bread a moment of luxury, a dollop in broth a burst of strength. You smile at the thought, survival not as monotony, but as richness measured in golden spoonfuls. There's an odd fragment of folklore about butter luck, the belief that butter churns could be bewitched, preventing cream from thickening unless charms were spoken. Imagine a woman muttering a prayer as she churns, fearful that spirits might spoil her work. It seems quaint, yet it reminds you how vital butter was. To fail at churning meant not just disappointment, but hunger. Back in the hall, the butter is shared. Flatbreads are dipped, porridge enriched, even scraps fed to children too small for tougher food. Elders sigh with relief at the softness on their tongues. The fire glows brighter, spirits rise, and for a moment, the longhouse feels less like a fortress against hunger and more like a home of abundance. The scholarly debate continues. Was butter a common sight on Viking tables, or a rare treat savoured carefully? The evidence cannot resolve it fully. But as you taste the richness again in your imagination, you know this much. Whether rare or common, it mattered deeply. It turned simple bread into comfort, plain broth into feast, and cold nights into survivable ones. The fire sinks low. Jars of butter cool against the wall, their golden tops glistening in the dim light. Families lie back on benches, bellies warm, lips still slick with fat. Dogs curl at their feet, content, their noses twitching with the smell that fills the hall. You close your eyes, your mouth coated in remembered richness, and know that survival was not only bitter or sour, sometimes it was golden and soft, spread across bread like sunlight in winter. The golden taste of butter lingers, rich and soft, but another kind of richness soon claims your senses, something deeper, darker, and far more solemn. In the corner of the hall, a man lifts a heavy cauldron onto the fire. Its contents are not grain or milk, but blood collected during slaughter. Tonight, the Vikings turn to one of their most efficient, if unsettling, strategies: blood pudding. Survival in winter meant using every part of the animal, and blood, with its thick iron tang, was too valuable to waste. Archaeological finds of burnt pots, often lined with residues containing iron-rich traces, suggest such dishes were real. Combined with saga references to blothmer or blood sausages, the evidence paints a picture of thrifty households turning slaughter into sustenance. Imagine the smell as the pot begins to bubble, metallic, earthy, spiced faintly with herbs, barley, or onions. The mixture thickens slowly, darkening, becoming pudding dense enough to slice. A curious tidbit comes from later Nordic tradition, where blood pudding was fried into cakes, eaten hot with butter or syrup. You picture a Viking woman ladling the thick mass onto a flat stone, flipping it carefully until the edges crisp. Children lean close, their eyes wide despite their grimaces. The smell is strong, the taste heavier than any broth, but in this house nothing is wasted. Still, historians argue about how frequently blood dishes were eaten. Some believe they were common after autumn slaughter, providing dense nutrition during the coldest weeks. Others suggest they were seasonal, tied to ritual feasts and ceremonies. The truth may be both practical food that also carried symbolic weight. Blood was never just matter. It was life, essence, and sacrifice. Inside the longhouse, the pudding is ladled into bowls. The texture is thick, almost gelatinous, the color deep as midnight. You lift a spoon in your imagination, take a bite. The flavor floods your tongue. Iron, rich, heavy, filling, The barley softens the edge, the herbs add brightness, but still the essence of blood dominates. You swallow, and warmth spreads quickly into your chest, more potent than meat alone. It is a meal that leaves no hunger behind. Among the stranger associations, blood was often tied to ritual. Sacrifices, offered to gods, sometimes included not only meat, but blood shared or sprinkled. Imagine a small portion set aside from the pot, poured into the fire with whispered prayers. The steam rises, curling into the rafters, carrying both nourishment and devotion. Food and faith intertwine once more, survival flavored with reverence. Scholars still debate whether these blood dishes blurred the line between sacred and ordinary. Was every pudding a quiet offering, or only those made at ritual times? Was the act of consuming blood seen as transgressive or as an affirmation of life? The sagas offer no final answer, leaving us to imagine both. Children slurping practical bowls by the fire, and priests raising ladles in solemn blessing. The sensory world grows vivid as you sit with them. The pot hisses, steam curling into your face. The air smells of herbs and iron, sharp enough to sting your nose. Spoons clatter, mouths chew slowly. The room heavy with the quiet of serious eating. No laughter rises, only murmurs of approval, sighs of satisfaction, the scrape of bowls against wood. Hunger is silenced here, if only for a while. Step outside into the night. Snow glitters under the stars, the air bitter cold. You think of the slaughter that made this possible, animals felled in autumn, blood caught in buckets, saved for nights like this. Waste nothing, use everything. Even blood becomes sustenance, thick and filling as bread. You walk back inside, your boots crunching, and feel a strange respect for this brutal but clever thrift. There's an odd little superstition in some northern lore. Spilling blood carelessly during preparation could invite bad luck or restless spirits. Picture a woman scolding her son for letting a drop fall on the floor, insisting it be wiped quickly, her voice trembling with unease. Such beliefs remind you that blood carried more than calories, it carried meaning, danger, and awe. Back inside, the last bowl's empty. Children sit back with full bellies. Elders nod approvingly. Dogs lick the floor for spills. The firelight flickers across faces, casting them in warm glow, their lips still darkened by pudding. The hall hums with quiet satisfaction, the storm outside muted by the heavy calm within. The scholarly question lingers. Was blood pudding feast or famine food? Was it ritual or routine? The evidence refuses to settle. But as you sit here, the taste heavy in your mouth, you feel the answer clearly. It was all of these. It was thrift and ritual, survival and celebration, necessity and belief, mixed into one pot. The fire sinks low. The pot is scraped clean, the bowls stacked, the hall drifting toward sleep. You close your eyes, the iron tang still sharp on your tongue, your belly heavy with warmth. And you understand. In the Viking winter, even blood was turned into life. Even the essence of sacrifice became supper. Nothing wasted, everything transformed, survival written into every bite. The iron tang of blood still seems to hang in the smoky rafters. But soon another scent steals its place, sweet, nutty, and rich in a quieter way. In the corner, a stone mortar rests on the floor, its rim worn smooth from years of grinding. Tonight, a woman kneels beside it, her hands steady as she crushes seeds with a heavy pestle. The crackle of shells breaking fills the hall, releasing sharp, grassy aromas. Seeds tiny, often overlooked, but brimming with life, were another thread in the Vikings' tapestry of survival. Archaeological excavations of Viking settlements reveal charred seeds among hearth remains, flax, hemp, and even wild mustard. They hint that these small ingredients were not mere afterthoughts but deliberate additions to diet and craft. Imagine scooping a handful of flax seeds into your palm, their slick shells catching firelight, then chewing them slowly. The flavor is faint, nutty, but their oils coat your tongue with a richness that belies their size. There's a curious tidbit from some finds. Hemp seeds may have been roasted and eaten, much like nuts. Picture a group gathered around the fire, popping roasted seeds into their mouths, their laughter rising as the tiny kernels crack between teeth. A humble snack, but welcome in a season where variety was scarce. The smallness of the seeds did not diminish their worth. Instead, their abundance in summer carried forward into winter, handful by handful. Yet historians remain divided on how central seeds truly were in Viking diets. Some argue they were vital, pressed into oils for lamps or cooking, ground into meal to mix with flour, even sprinkled into stews. Others believe their role was minor, more incidental than intentional, their presence in archaeological contexts, the trace of weeds or fodder. The debate flickers like the firelight, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, never quite resolved. Inside the longhouse, the mortar hums with rhythm. The pestle thuds again and again, seeds cracking, powder building in the bowl. The smell rises nutty, faintly sweet, a little bitter. Women scoop the crushed seeds into porridge, stirring until the mixture thickens, richer and smoother than grain alone. Children wait impatiently, their spoons tapping wood, their eyes following every movement. You taste it in your imagination. Porridge laced with flax, smoother, fattier, more filling. The bitterness of the seeds sharpens the bland grain, while their oils slide across your tongue. It is not indulgence, but it is difference, and in a world where meals often blurred into sameness, that mattered. Among the stranger uses, seeds sometimes found their way into medicine. Flaxseed, when boiled, produced a slimy liquid used to soothe sore throats or aid digestion. Picture a healer lifting a clay cup of the viscous drink, pressing it into the hands of a coughing child, whispering encouragement as the child grimaces at its odd texture. In that moment, food once again blurred into remedy, necessity into healing. Researchers still debate whether the Vikings pressed seeds into oil with any regularity. Some argue oil lamps may have burned not only animal fat, but also plant oils. Others believe pressing was too laborious, with most oils consumed directly through seed. The absence of pressing equipment leaves the question open, a puzzle scattered like seeds on the floor of history. The hall fills with sound, as bowls of seed-thickened porridge are passed. Spoons scrape, children giggle, elders murmur their approval. Dogs sniff curiously but recoil at the bitterness, to the amusement of the crowd. The fire glows brighter, the steam rises thicker, and the mood softens as bellies fill. You eat alongside them in your mind, chewing the nutty, oily mix, your hunger soothed by the power of something so small. Step outside into the snow. The fields lie bare, but you remember them in summer. Flax flowers nodding blue against green, hemp stalks rustling tall, wild herbs scattering seeds in the wind. Those tiny specks, harvested and hidden in sacks, now carry entire families through the storm. You scoop snow into your hand, imagine it full of seeds instead, and marvel at how survival can rest on things so delicate. There is an odd superstition in later Scandinavian lore. Spilling seeds carelessly could invite bad luck, for each one represented potential life wasted. Picture a child scolded for dropping a handful, the mother sweeping them carefully, murmuring that every seed had its purpose. To lose one was to tempt hunger. You smile softly at the thought, understanding that such beliefs were less about spirits than about respect for survival itself. Back inside, the mortar is emptied, the pestle laid aside, the last bowls scraped clean. Children slump against their parents, cheeks shiny with porridge. Elders lean back, their eyes half closed in drowsy satisfaction. Dogs curl close, tails twitching as they sleep. The hall hums with quiet fullness, the sharp tang of seeds still lingering in the air. Scholars may never settle the question, were seeds vital or marginal? But tonight, in the glow of the fire, you sense the truth. These tiny fragments of summer carried power far beyond their size. They thickened porridge, healed sickness, lifted spirits, and filled bellies. They were small, but in winter, small things could mean survival. The fire sinks low, shadows stretch long. You lean back, your mouth still tasting faint nuttiness, your stomach soothed, your heart strangely light. Outside, the snow falls endlessly, silent and cold. Inside, seeds ground into porridge prove that survival was not only about meat and grain, but also about the patience to gather, preserve, and honor even the smallest gifts of the earth. The faint nuttiness of seeds fades, replaced by the heavy scent of smoke clinging to your clothes. You glance toward the rafters, where cured meats and fish still dangle, their surfaces glistening in the firelight. But tonight, your attention drifts to another form of preservation, one not hung overhead but buried deep below. In the earth, in pits dug and sealed, food was hidden from time, turned strange by the soil, and pulled out again when hunger struck. This was burial storage, a practice as old as fear itself, and in Viking winters it could mean the line between survival and starvation. Archaeological digs across northern Europe have revealed storage pits lined with clay or straw, sometimes containing traces of meat, grain, or even dairy. In some cases, entire animal carcasses were lowered into cold earth, preserved by frost and soil. Imagine crouching in the snow, prying open a wooden cover, and breathing in the smell of damp earth. From the darkness, a hunk of salted meat emerges, stiff with cold, crusted with soil. It is not pleasant, but it is edible, and in a world of hunger, that was enough. One quirky tidbit lingers from later Nordic lore. Butter or cheese was occasionally buried in bogs, where peat's acidity preserved it for years. Picture a farmer trudging through marshland, digging into wet soil, and pulling free a waxy block of bog butter. Its smell is rancid, its texture strange, yet it is still food. To us, it seems grotesque. To them, it was treasure saved for desperate days. Historians remain divided on how widespread burial storage was. Some argue it was common, an obvious strategy in a land of frost and soil. Others believe it was limited, risky, and prone to spoilage if done poorly. The evidence is patchy, the truth muddled. Was this clever innovation or desperate gamble? Scholars still wrestle with the question. Inside the longhouse, the memory of these buried stores becomes story and reassurance. A man recounts digging up a pig carcass in midwinter, its flesh still red and edible. Another tells of finding butter so old it crumbled, yet it fed his family for a week. Laughter and grimaces mingle, but beneath it lies gratitude, because when storms raged and boats froze, those pits in the earth were silent guardians. You imagine the sensory shock, the first bite of earth, preserved meat, its flavor sour, musty, salty. The chew is tough, the aftertaste unsettling, yet it fills your stomach and warms your chest. Hunger does not care for delicacy. You wipe your mouth, grateful even as your tongue recoils. The fire helps chase away the taste, but your belly settles, and that is enough. Among the stranger practices, some sagas suggest burial storage tied into ritual. Food hidden in earth might be seen as offering to gods of fertility, later reclaimed as a blessing. Picture a woman kneeling at a pit, whispering prayers before covering it with soil, then months later retrieving the food as if the earth had returned her gift. Was it religion or practicality wrapped in myth? The answer slips away like breath in frost. Step outside into the night. The snow crunches underfoot, the air stings your nose, and you picture pits hidden under drifts, waiting. Some are lined with stone, others with straw, all marked by memory rather than sign. To the untrained eye they are invisible. To the family who dug them they are salvation. You kneel, sweep aside snow, press your hand to the frozen lid, and feel the chill of earth holding life in its depths. The hall smells faintly of soil as families speak of these stores. Children shiver at the thought of bog butter, wrinkling their noses, while elders nod solemnly at memories of hard winters eased by such food. Dogs perk their ears, curious, as if sensing the earth itself held secrets of sustenance. Scholars debate still. Were burial pits signs of plenty, or of desperation? Did they hold regular supplies, or only emergency hoards? Some suggest they reflect community planning, others see them as last resorts. The arguments go round and round, like the turning of seasons, never quite landing. Yet as you sit here, you sense the truth lies in both. Buried food was both preparation and prayer, foresight and fear entwined. The sensory world sharpens. The fire crackles, but the hall is quiet, each person lost in thought of the hidden stores outside. The taste of soil clings to your imagination, musty and cold, yet beneath it lingers reassurance. Knowing that food lies buried, waiting, gives courage to face another storm. Back inside, bowls of fresher food are passed, but talk continues of pits and bogs. Stories flow, one of butter forgotten for years, another of meat dug up too late, spoiled and useless. Each tale ends the same, with laughter, or grim acceptance, or gratitude. Nothing about burial storage was perfect, yet in the harshest winters, imperfection was still survival. The scholarly question remains unanswered, but your own senses tell you the truth. You can almost taste the earth, smell the bog, feel the cold meat in your hand. It is not feast food, not comfort, not celebration. It is hunger's answer, crude and strange, but real. And in the end, that was what mattered. The fire dims further. Families settle into quiet rest, their minds soothed by the knowledge that beneath their feet, in soil and bog, food still waits. You lean back, your lips curling faintly at the imagined taste of earth. Outside, snow deepens. Inside, buried treasure sustains. Survival, you realize, sometimes means trusting the ground itself to guard your future. The earthy taste of buried meat and bog butter lingers like a shadow in your mind. But now the hall shifts into a softer rhythm. Tonight's food is not so much about survival as it is about ending the day in peace. A kettle sits at the edge of the fire, its steam rising in thin curls that smell faintly of herbs. Someone sprinkles dried leaves into the pot yarrow. Angelica, maybe mint-picked and saved from summer. This is no feast, not even a proper meal, but a calming drink shared before sleep. In the Viking winter, such moments mattered as much as bread or meat. Archaeological traces of dried herbs and written hints in later sagas suggest the Vikings brewed herbal teas or infusions. Though they lacked the leaves we call tea today, they steeped what the land offered. Imagine lowering your face to a steaming wooden cup, the scent sharp and soothing at once. You sip, the heat filling your chest, the bitterness softened by honey. The warmth is more than physical. It is reassurance, a sign that the day's hunger is met, that rest is allowed. A curious tidbit comes from Norse medical texts centuries later. Herbs like angelica were thought to ward off illness, especially scurvy. Some even believed certain teas carried protective magic. Picture a healer handing a steaming cup to a weary sailor, telling him it would keep spirits and sickness at bay. Whether the science was real or not, the comfort surely was. Still, historians remain divided on how central these herbal brews were. Some argue they were everyday practice, as natural as boiling water. Others believe they were occasional, used more for healing or ritual than for daily comfort. The evidence is too scattered to be certain, but the idea persists: cups raised in quiet moments, herbs bridging summer's abundance with winter's need. Inside the longhouse, the mood is gentle. Children yawn as they sip, their eyelids heavy. Elders cradle their cups with wrinkled hands, blowing softly at the steam. The fire snaps quietly. The dogs sigh, the whole hall slowing into drowsy calm. You sip with them in your imagination. The tea bitter, grassy, but sweetened with a drizzle of honey. It coats your throat, warms your chest, and spreads like a blanket through your body. Among the stranger practices, some herbs were burned as incense before being brewed, the smoke thought to carry prayers upward. Imagine a woman wafting smoke through the hall, then dropping the same herbs into water, transforming ritual into drink. The line between nourishment and spirituality blurs again. as it has so often. The scholarly debate continues. Was this nightly custom for all, or only for some? Were herbs rare treasures guarded for illness, or common leaves tossed into kettles for comfort? No one can say with certainty. But here, in the hall's hush, the truth feels less about frequency and more about meaning. Each sip is not just liquid but ritual, not just warmth but connection. The sensory details deepen as you linger in this scene. The firelight flickers gently, reflecting on the liquid surface. Steam curls in delicate spirals, carrying scents of mint, sage, fennel. Children's whispers fade into snores, their hands still clutching empty cups. Elders lean back, their lips shining faintly with honey. The dogs' tails twitch as they dream. Step outside for a final breath. The snow falls in soft silence. Stars glimmer faintly overhead. You exhale, the cold biting, then step back into the hall where warmth wraps around you like a cloak. You realize that survival was never just food, it was also rest, ritual, and reassurance. Even a simple herb in hot water became part of the struggle against the dark. Inside, the kettle is empty. The cups are stacked. Families are already lying down, cloaks wrapped tight, children curled against parents, dogs nestled in straw. The fire glows low, shadows stretch long. A quiet hum of sleep fills the room. You close your eyes, your mouth still tasting faint herbs, your body warmed, your heart steadied. Historians may argue endlessly about details. Which herbs, how often, what meaning. But the feeling of this moment needs no debate. It is peace, earned after the labors of survival. It is calm, sipped from a cup as snow falls outside. It is life, fragile but enduring, carried one breath, one sip, one night at a time. And so the tale softens as the longhouse drifts into silence. You lean back, breathing slowly, letting the imagery fade. The smells of grain, fish, dairy, blood, seeds and herbs linger like ghosts, reminders of all the ways survival was shaped. The Vikings endured by using everything, by wasting nothing, by finding strength in even the smallest gifts. They ate in hunger and in hope, in ritual and in routine. And as you drift with them into sleep, you realize that their story is not just history, it is a lesson in resilience, one bite at a time. Now the story grows softer still. You lie back in your own bed, far from longhouses and winter storms, but the rhythm of survival lingers. The Vikings ate what they had: roots pulled from soil, fish pulled from sea, milk turned sour, seeds ground small, blood simmered into pudding. Each taste was more than flavor. It was persistence. It was the act of saying, "We will live through this night, and the next, and the next." You can almost hear the fire in their hall fading to embers. The crackle slows, the smoke thins, the glow softens. Outside, snow still falls, quiet as ash, blanketing earth in peace. Inside, families curl close, their breath steady, their dreams untroubled. Dogs sigh, children murmur in sleep, elders rest with calm faces. All of them carried forward by the simple miracle of food, however plain, however strange, however humble. Your own breathing slows now, matching theirs, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Each breath is steady, smooth enough. You feel the warmth of your blanket, the softness of your bed, and the gentle rhythm of your heartbeat, as reliable as the crackling fire. Let your thoughts quiet, drifting like smoke rising to rafters. Imagine the hall growing darker, the snow falling thicker, the night stretching long but gentle. You are safe. You are fed. You are warm. There is no need to hold on to anything more tonight. Sleep comes the way spring does, slow at first, then all at once, melting frost into water, hunger into fullness, silence into birdsong. Let it take you now, calmly, steadily, without resistance. Drift away as the longhouse fades, as the snow hushes, as the story ends. Sweet dreams.